slide. This just kind of gives you an idea of what the big challenge is. So we have, I broke this down into 4 major categories: EE, SCHIP, low income / disadvantaged communities, and cap and trade, or which are the build and tech funds. So each of these big sort of buckets of funding and programs have different goals. So with EE, it's kilowatt savings and greenhouse gas reductions. SCHIP, it's load shifting and greenhouse gas reductions. The low income programs are largely about kilowatt savings and home comfort and safety. And cap and trade is just straight greenhouse gas reductions. So this is where the complexity really starts coming in, is that we've got these different funding sources for all these different goals, but they're funding the same things. They're funding mostly heat pump appliances. So this is, so when it comes to mixing and matching these things, there's some complexity that we get in with this. Okay, next slide. And this just gives you, this is a list of all the different programs and how they sort of break down between upstream as it goes down the supply chain, from upstream down to midstream and downstream. And you can see that this is, this is how it breaks down. You see there's quite a few programs on in the downstream categories from both IOUs and non-IOUs. You're going to hear about some of these in later panels, so I'm not going to go into the details, but this kind of gives you an idea of just broken down into the supply chain pieces. Next slide. These are sort of big into 3 main topic areas, and within this, these are sort of questions that I'm posing, that we've discussed with the panelists ahead of time, that they're going to be talking about with some of their ideas. Topic 1 is just plain incentive layering. When is it appropriate to use multiple incentives for the same appliance? When isn't it? Should there be a minimum or maximum incentive cost for the customer? Or another way to say that is, how much skin in the game should the customer have for an appliance? And if so, how should that be determined? And the last one is, how should program administrators in overlapping service territories address incentive layering? Next topic. Evaluation and attribution. Do the CPM's current evaluation metrics create a disincentive to take advantage of multiple incentives? That was we've had one comment letter from RECURVE that stated that yes, they are. So we'll get into that later. The next question has to ascribe energy savings, GHG emissions, or other metrics when one appliance gets multiple incentives. And the last topic. And standards. So what you're going to hear a few times today from the presentations is, we're really concerned about this gentleman in the slide, the contractors. It's the contractors who are going to have to, they're the ones that are most of these appliances a good percentage of these appliances will be installed by contractors, and they're the ones that are going to need to deal with this landscape of incentives. So we really want to figure out what are ways that we can either build upon what we have, or if we need to create something new, what does that need to be? Also, should there be shared technical standards and specs across all ratepayer funded programs in California for these appliances? I know one idea that we've had that we actually built into the tech RFP is to develop a database of the incentivized appliances that would be tracked by serial number that's given at the manufacturer level, so that as it goes to the supply chain, we can follow through that database what's already, what interventions have already happened through incentives. So those are sort of the 3 big question areas that this staff proposal will be taking on, and we've invited the panelists today to help us think some of these through. So next slide. And that's it for my slides. We've got a few minutes for questions before we go on to the panelists. As Nate just said, they go through the Q&A box in your WebEx. And if there are none,
All right, Rory, we have one question or two questions in, and three actually now. So first one is from Tristan, and it reads, energy efficiency has limits due to physics. If a 13M, not sure what the M stands for there, California heat pump water heaters can be time shifted to come on between 12 and 4 p.m. and turn off at 5 to 9, 4.2 gigawatts can be shifted. Will there be different incentives between forever dumb and schedulable real-time controllable heat pumps? And I'm going to find Tristan and unmute him right
now. So yeah, that is something that we're definitely looking at. We're interested in perform function, and I believe that conversation has been gone in. We've had a pretty in-depth conversation about that in the SCHIP proceeding. Isn't that right, Nate?
Yes, we have had a in-depth conversation about that. There were two workshops held in, oh boy, April and March and one in May. Both those slide decks are available on the CPUC SCHIP website.
So the answer is yeah, we are looking into that and taking that notion very seriously.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. So there's three different levels, right? So the forever dumb, the schedulable, which is Title 24 JA13, and then sort of real-time control to be able to tweak that, which seems to be critical given that some load profiles on some feeders and substations are sort of the opposite of what a time of use schedule would require. So that kind of ability to tweak it can be really important. And we just want to make sure that we incentivize the different three levels in different ways, ideally, because there's going to be so much value long term to the upper levels. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that.
Rory, we have another question from Katie Wu asking about the timing of the staff proposal that will be resulting from this workshop.
I'll get into that in the final slide, but in case you're not around, we will get to work on this as soon as this workshop is over. And I don't want to promise a particular timeline. I know that our long-term goal is to have something done before the tech implementer comes on board, which we expect will happen Q1 of 2021. But I'd like to have a first draft out to people a lot sooner than that.
Did anyone else have any questions at this time?
All right. Well, despite our late start, it sounds like we're actually a little bit ahead of time, so that's good. And we'll go on to our first panelist, and that would be Katie Wu from Gridworks. So if you wanted to switch over to Katie, she can take it from here.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Do I need to do anything, or is Nate going to run those slides?
Nate will
I'll
run
the
the
slide. Katie, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Rory and Energy Division for having me this morning. I am humbled to be on this panel and to talk to you all about barriers and opportunities for incentive layering in building decarbonization. Next slide, please. A quick introduction for GridWorks for anyone who might not be familiar with us. We are not a party in the proceeding, but our work is in supporting stakeholders and facilitating conversations on challenges to decarbonizing electricity grids, whether that is distribution system planning, interconnection, load management, or considering how to manage legacy infrastructure. California is very near and dear to us, but we're also working in Oregon, Colorado, and Hawaii. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with the goal ahead of us. These figures are from E3's 2018 Deep Decarbonization Study. And if building decarbonization through electrification is the pathway to our 2050 goals, which the pool of incentives would suggest that it is, by 2030, 50% of new heating appliances need to be heat pumps, increasing up to 100% around 2040, 2045. And this level of market transformation is going to require creative thinking, innovative solutions, and new partnerships. Next slide, please. But finding information about the available programs and related program requirements is challenging and sometimes confusing. This screenshot here is from the Savings by Design website. And I recognize that it's great that these program requirements are posted. I think that they are listed about as clearly as they possibly can be. But they're still sort of hard to understand with the different terminology that's in there for anyone who may be new to these sets of programs. And to Rory's earlier point, I think it is just really critical to remember the importance of contractors in this space and how customers will rely on contractors for their knowledge and expertise in helping to scope out projects. I recognize also that there's a bit of a program gap for retrofits in market rate multifamily buildings, which can limit incentives for support equipment like panel upgrades or wiring upgrades, as well as installation costs, which can be significant for heat pump, water heater retrofits. Those appliances require more airflow around the appliance, so the installation costs can sometimes cost just as much as the equipment cost. And this is significant because more than half of California's multifamily buildings were constructed before there were building energy efficiency standards. So there is a lot of opportunity for building decarbonization within this building type, but seemingly a lack of program options at this point. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Katie. One second.
That's okay. No worries. That's okay.
We were here?
Yes, thank you. This one with all the text. So apologies for all the text, everyone, but I do think it's important to be sort of plain and clear about the program rules, which as they are currently set up, can limit participation and the value stream on both a pre-installation and post-installation basis. On a pre-installation side, if you are a customer or developer or contractor, the lack of uniform qualifying criteria across programs makes it difficult to select the one that best suits your project needs. And given the variety of program administrators with overlapping service areas, programs that can offer similar services and products but are not ratepayer funded programs, and variety of financing options from utilities and banks with different lending terms, it can just be difficult to know what's the right fit for the project that you're seeking to implement. But if you do get your project installed, on that post-installation side, there are some limits to the ongoing value stream that can help to either reduce your payback period or offer ongoing compensation to offset your operations and maintenance costs, since resources that received incentives or financing may be prohibited from participating in procurement solicitations. And specific examples include resources that received incentives through SCHIP are precluded from the Automated Demand Response Program, which is a big deal if we think there will be a bunch of grid integrated water heaters out there. And the incrementality rules within the distribution investment deferral framework limit the ability for energy efficiency resources to count towards offsetting traditional demand infrastructure projects. And there may be some exceptions to these rules. This program information is from early last year, so things may be different, or the incrementality rules across load-serving entities might be slightly different. But my point here is that for the contractor, if you're trying to determine the project value and sell that project to a customer, if you have to determine project value on a case-by-case basis, or if there are very particular rules that you need to understand, so it's sort of challenging to understand what each project is worth, it can be really difficult to sell those projects. So again, just coming back to the importance of the contractor, the value streams for each project need to be very clear. The rules around that need to be very clear so that contractors can sell those projects. Next slide, please. And from a regulatory perspective, for the people who are providing oversight on program effectiveness and the impact of incentive stacking and spending, the frameworks to understand value are inconsistent. There are different costs and benefits across in the way that the standard practice manual tests are applied. This table is from a few years ago, so it might be slightly different now, but I think the overall point that there are different costs and benefits within demand response, distributed generation, and energy efficiency, and possibly different ways that those costs and benefits are quantified, that can just make it really difficult to compare across resources that all fall within this building decarbonization umbrella. And between the CPUC and the CEC, the differences in the avoided cost calculator and the time-dependent valuation methods also lead to different values for avoided energy. And given the importance of the CEC and the CPUC collaborating and building decarbonization, this is just another area of confusion when the same project can have a different value depending on the regulatory agency you're sort of working in. Next slide, please. And I recognize the importance of these rules and the cost effectiveness framework. They are intended to prevent double dipping and to protect ratepayers from overspending on incentives to individuals or companies. But I think it's also important to recognize that there are low income and disadvantaged communities that lag in receiving benefits from the clean energy economy. And that the frameworks that we have now, the program rules and cost effectiveness frameworks that we have, were established at a time when we didn't have the same equity lens that we have today. The standard practice manual tests are from the 1980s, I believe, and time-dependent valuation method is at least 20 years old. So at the time that they were established, I think the context that we were working within is different, or was different. Specifically, I think that today there is a recognition that programs are aiming to achieve health, comfort, and safety benefits, which are not within the current decision-making framework. And it is just a gap in the way that we provide oversight to programs and the goals that they're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. The good news is that solutions already exist. These publications are from about the last year or two and include recommendations to overcome some of the barriers that I've mentioned here. And as we talked about in the data reporting workshop a couple of weeks ago, I think it's just really important that parties, including agencies, remain accountable for programmatic goals and results from those programs and transparently track the right metrics to ensure that everything is unfolding as you are intending it to. Next slide, please. And I do want to be specific about what recommendations are available. In Scott Murdershaw's paper that he developed for CalSet, he includes very detailed recommendations on decision-making actions that the CPUC can take to clarify the ongoing value stream of projects. In the CEC's Clean Energy and Low-Income Multifamily Buildings, they suggest designing programs with a holistic approach to prioritize efficiency, health, comfort, and safety. In the 2019 Energy Efficiency Action Plan, the CEC and CPUC recommend leveraging the California Technical Forum to study market gaps and quantifying building decarbonization co-benefits, which can also help to clarify the value stream. And in that same publication, the CEC and CPUC recommend tracking recommendations implementation through an advisory group, again, just to keep everyone accountable, make sure things are transparent and equitable. Next slide, please. And even with these great solutions, I think more will need to be done to achieve the market transformation that we need for those heat pump adoption rates that I showed a little bit earlier. And again, I think that that will really depend on creative thinking, innovative solution, and new partnerships. Communities that have been underserved in the past need to trust that these programs are going to meet their needs. And these are just a few suggestions for consideration among staff and stakeholders. But again, I think that we really need to think outside of the box in order to achieve the market transformation that we're seeking. So you might try aggregating incentives into a pool of grants for community-based organizations that are already working in underserved communities. Those communities have already, the organizations have already built trust with the communities, so it may be a little bit easier for them to intervene in underserved communities that aren't familiar with either the CPUC or program administrator programs. It's important also to provide technical assistance to community-based organizations. They often are not funded for program implementation and are likely understaffed already. So either leverage the existing workforce to provide that technical assistance or invest in the workforce within community-based organizations to support project design and ongoing operations and maintenance. Coming back to the value stream and better understanding the value of these programs and projects to customers, to foster that relationship building, to foster building trust within communities, it may be worthwhile to work directly with program participants to determine the project value throughout implementation and operations and maintenance, so that from a regulatory perspective, we can just better understand the participant perspective and what value they are gaining from program participation. And lastly, I think developing a long-term framework to work with community development financial institutions is a great opportunity for the energy industry. I think that this challenge of leveraging public and private funding has been long-standing within the energy industry. And as I understand, it's something that the industry is still working on. As I understand CDFIs, they are organizations that invest in affordable housing projects, either in both retrofits and new construction, that already have relationships so that they are working within communities. So it may be a great partnership to build and foster so that the energy industry can also make way into leveraging public and private funding. Next slide, please. And I think I can't emphasize enough the importance of investing in underserved communities. These communities are going to be critical to achieving the market transformation we seek and the heat pump adoption rates that we need to achieve climate goals. And the CEC's Energy Equity Indicator tool includes map data with census tract level data to show where there have been low levels of energy efficiency participation in the past. These areas had an average of 8 households per 1,000 participating in energy efficiency programs. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for building decarbonization in these areas and a lot of opportunity to make headway in early years of programs. Next slide. So this is my contact information if anyone is seeking additional information, and I've also included links to the references that I mentioned if anyone wants to follow up afterwards. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. That was really good, and there's some really good practical ideas in there. So we're going to hold questions until the end of this panel. So 2 more panelists, and then we'll get into questions. And our next panelist is Carmen from RECURVE. And I should add that Carmen's or RECURVE's comment letter in the proceeding was one that really got us thinking about this and really kind of led to this workshop. So so thank you for that, Carmen, and you can take it away if you're
Great. Thanks, Rory. So I'm going to kind of focus on some of the things that were in our comments because I think they really hone in on some of the key updates that are necessary to make decarbonization incentives work for tech in particular in this context, but I think they're applicable across the whole decarbonization strategy for the state. So first, we need to be able to encourage co-funding and remove existing barriers in the cost test. That's pretty specific to energy efficiency, and I'll dive into that. Second, we need to be able to use meter-based quantification, normalized metered energy consumption, as it's called in California, as the foundation of our tracking processes across all these decarbonization strategies. And third, we need to be able to use these changes in focus to have us hone in on market design rather than be focusing on program design to synergize decarbonization activities across the state. So I'm going to go through each one of these in kind. Nate, can you give me the next slide, please? So to illustrate problem number one, we have a bugger of a cost test in California energy efficiency. My colleague Adam Shear likes to use this example of the energy efficiency residential programs. So if you look at just the net investment and the benefits per program spend, which one would look to you like it's the best deal for ratepayers? To me, it looks like program A. But if you click through, given the benefits per program spend and kind of the net private investment, you'd say program A. But if you look at the total resource cost test, it doesn't really pan out that way. You wouldn't be putting your money to back program A, which happens to be the advanced home upgrade. And on a PAC basis, it is clearly the better choice because the TRC is really loaded with all the participant costs. And even though we know from evaluation that a large portion of the investment that consumers are willing to make is to capture other value for themselves, we look at that as kind of a barrier rather than an opportunity for really leveraging their needs to meet grid needs. It's really a bridge to scale. And our cost tests right now in energy efficiency present a barrier to that. Now, I know that cost tests are not at play for the tech program, but they are for the fuel switching measures like Rory had pointed out. And given some of the current rules and incentives that come into the total resource cost test, my understanding is that it will still count against participant costs. So programs that are trying to tackle comprehensive upgrades will continue to be kind of deprioritized, even when looking at these fuel switching work papers like yesterday, I was further baffled to find that incentives may exceed measured costs. And I haven't really even gotten my head around that one yet to understand how it's going to upend even the TRC and PAC implications. There's probably people on this webinar that have a better handle on that. But my point is that we don't want to be hobbling comprehensive energy efficiency programs or any efficiency programs that could be gateways to installing electrification measures. And it appears to me that the current cost tests that we have are doing just that. And this is just one example of reconciliation. Next slide, please. We have a lot to reconcile and coordinate. This is the world we live in, right? This is the crazy quilt of siloed proceedings at the commission with their own status quo ways of deriving calculations for cost effectiveness, like Katie had pointed out. But it's also presumably how California is expected to meet our decarbonization objectives, and they're lofty. It might be tempting for those of us who've been around for a while to kind of pat ourselves on the back for being able to understand this complexity. But I think it's really important that we step back to look at what we can use to reconcile, especially for market deployment and getting to scale. And to me, what's happening at the meter is what is our key way to be able to reconcile this crazy quilt. Meter-based quantification or normalized metered energy consumption allows us to understand the impacts of direct interventions, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, and use comparison and control groups that are based on meter-based quantification or consumption analytics to understand the system as a whole and conduct macro analysis and other things. Because, next slide, please. because it's this carbon intensity that we really want to be focusing on. This looks a lot more organized to me than that other slide. And I don't think we really had a sense of it when NMEC was adopted in legislation in 2015. But since the advent of SB 100, and as more of those documents that Katie was pointing out have come out, I think it's become more and more clear that NMEC really provides a common framework for us to harmonize this chaos that we live in. You can think of it kind of as a unified field theory, in that NMEC organizes decarbonized consumption at the meter. And because it focuses on the impacts, it can be more readily translated into the value of changing consumption patterns from a wide range of solutions, not just energy efficiency. Next slide. The Public Utilities Commission has the regulatory authority and the tools to do this now. I'd like to highlight Caltrac and the OpenEE meter are already being used in the energy efficiency portfolio. They're cited in the IDER pro forma contracts, and they are being used as the foundation for CCA competitive solicitations for DERs right now. So for those who might not be familiar, Caltrac provides a standardized, detailed method for calculating changes in consumption due to interventions at the meter. Those might be interventions that cause upward shifts or downward shifts or the net of both. And they're built on industry best practices. It's a pre-post regression analysis at the site that's normalized by weather and occupancy. They're empirically tested and they've been peer reviewed. And the hourly methods, in fact, are grounded in the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab time of week and temperature model. The methods themselves are operationalized in the OpenEE meter open source code base, which allows for transparent, repeatable calculations at scale. And since it's open source, it's available without restriction and can be applied in lots of different contexts. These projects are maintained through a collaborative community of implementers, analysts, utilities, and other software vendors via the Linux Foundation's focused effort on energy, which is called LFE. Next slide, please. So in the context of the tech program in particular, but also applicable to build and everything else, it's these common sense algorithms that are critical for understanding the impact of interventions on the grid on a time and locational basis, not to mention their ability to target those interventions, even for a midstream upstream program design, to places where it could have the greatest impacts. All you need to have is the technology installed, the date of installation, and the customer service ID to tie it back to a utility bill. And this, to me, is not a large data burden, given the value of the information that will be derived, your actual GHG impacts relative to past consumption and grid carbon intensity. And you could be projecting that into the future as well. Or the value of avoiding some of our current drama, like the upstream lighting style drama of not knowing where bulbs go that we've all experienced in the ex-post period for energy efficiency programs. It still seems to persist. Next slide, please. So once you have that grounding in the site-specific direct impacts of interventions, that also enables you to do a whole nother set of analytics at the macro level with comparison groups or other population analytics. You can be looking at the relative impacts to the system. And this type of large-scale analysis and data management is completely within scope of the concepts in the 2019 Energy Efficiency Action Plan, the CEC's obligations under AB 802, or maybe part of the Catalina initiative that's been kicked off or that is still in the works. And it's also been a component of the potential analyses for EE and DR potential. So looking at macro analytics and data is really important. Next slide, please. I think particularly in the case of building electrification, knowing where those consumption changes are happening relative to the avoided costs and the grid carbon intensity is going to help us synergize these interventions and enable meaningful carbon accounting. You can also think of it as it could be a basis for new streams of funding. As electrification generates new revenue for utilities, those increased margins could potentially be the source for more investment. And that in turn could create a positive feedback loop to sustain or expand investments to get to scale. Because at the root of it, we need to scale our investments. We need to find efficiencies in deploying these resources, and our siloed implementation in constrained program budgets is a really limited model to make decarbonization part of the fabric of our everyday transactions. Next slide, please. So with meter-based outcomes tied to value, we can transition to price signals in a market design construct rather than incentives in a program design construct. If you consider the base price for demand flexibility being set from maybe energy efficiency and demand response based on their resource value, click to the next bit, Nick. From there, we can add in layers of price based on the value of the additional interventions and impacts, one more click, either to the greenhouse gas reductions or to other social objectives, maybe resiliency or other long-term objectives like zero net energy, and offer that price to aggregators to pool customer assets, or in some cases, we could be using that price to offer incentives directly to customers. Last slide. Sorry. So to scale these markets for decarbonization, like I said, we need to encourage co-funding and remove the existing barriers within the programs that we have in the cost tests. We need to use meter-based quantification, NMEC, as the foundation for tracking progress across all our decarb strategies. And when we can tie these impacts to the value, we can now shift to market designs to synergize decarbonization activities across the state and through a range of creative business models, like Katie was saying, that help us bridge customer needs with our grid needs, with our social objectives, and with our climate needs. So I hope that this vision can be a key part of staff considerations on the next steps for build and tech programs to prepare them for optimal performance alongside all the other initiatives in the state.
A lot, Carmen. Good, well presented information, and love the infographics. So next we have Ralph Dinola from the New Buildings Institute. I know Ralph has been thinking quite a bit about how to kind of share resources and tie all this together. So I appreciate Ralph's thinking on this, and take it away, Ralph.
All right, thanks so much, Rory, and Carmen and Katie. Those were excellent presentations. So I hope to be able to build on what you've shared, and hopefully I have mouse control here. Oh, there's the slide advance. Okay. For those of you not familiar with New Buildings Institute, we're a nonprofit based in Portland, Oregon. We were founded in 1997, and we are focused on advancing zero energy and zero carbon buildings by driving the market to adopt advanced technologies. And we are especially excited about what's happening in California, and we've supported the work of the California Public Utilities Commission for some time, especially around the energy efficiency strategic plan and action plans, and the move to advance zero net energy buildings. So this session today, and we do our work in three primary program areas: getting to zero leadership and market development, building and program innovation, and advancing codes and policy. So we feel like these are the core to advancing these efforts. So certainly, California has had decades of leadership on energy efficiency and also climate action, and a lot of legislation and policies have led us to where we are today. And I think what we've come to, as I think the previous presenters shared, is that there is a lot of leadership in California and so many great advances, but still a challenge to achieve the market transformation that's needed to achieve the climate goals that have been set by the leadership in the state. Put it very simply, there are three kind of tools in the toolbox that can be very effectively used to move these ambitions forward: and incentives, regulations, and rates. And these are all, I think, the two previous presenters talked about markets, and these are the tools that we have to try and use markets as they exist and use them for market transformation. So, and in terms of regulation and policy moving forward, the recent advances of cities adopting these decarbonization and electrification reach codes, it has been a huge move in the direction of regulation. And looking at statewide, more than 30 jurisdictions and upwards of 50 planning to adopt these reach codes, sets up the market for the opportunity for transformation. And actually, getting there will require some mechanism of incentives. And there are, as Rory shared, there's a robust set of incentives in place in California, but are they working in a harmonized manner to deliver the promise of the climate goals that we seek, along with other benefits? Looking back at CPUC policies, there has in the past been a prohibition of this double dipping of incentives and what we're calling today layering of incentives or stacking. And again, I think it was maybe Katie that had shared that those policies were set at a time where we had a different view of the lens of equity and opportunity for customers and citizens of the state. So altogether, a number of these incentives can add up to a substantial amount of funding in the market, but is it adequate to achieve these climate goals? And I know that this is just a portion of kind of a sampling of the incentives available today. So we've been involved in the facilitating the Advanced Water Heating Initiative. This is in partnership with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Bonneville Power Administration, and a number of utilities supporting this effort across the West Coast. In California, there are approximately 13.5 million water heaters. About 95% of them are using either natural gas or propane, about 90% natural gas. And as we heard earlier, the E3 study shows we need to make this transformation happen in, especially in water heating, getting about 50% of the stock to electrify by 2030. So as part of the initiative, we have tracked over 16 programs that are incenting heat pump water heaters in the state. And there's a lot of complexity in terms of which part of the market they're serving. Are they upstream, midstream, or downstream? What is the amount of incentive available? Who's offering it? And could these incentives actually be put together in some way to actually provide a more inducement for customers to make this choice, or contractors or distributors? So that question of layering, is it something that we can do? Is there a prohibition, or are we looking at serving different parts of the market? Are we looking at trying to address greenhouse gas emissions? Are we looking to address energy efficiency? Are we looking to serve low-income communities? And so, as I think Carmen shared just a moment ago, the crazy quilt, that is this set of programs and incentives in the state are all well-intentioned, and I think they hold the promise of delivering on market transformation if they can be brought together and harmonized, as previous presenters suggested. So we can look to resources. The Desire database shares nationally what incentives are available, and you look at the state of California, and they're tracking 217 policies and incentives. These are not all financial incentives. But just to say that there's a number of incentives in their database that they're tracking. But it's hard to know where those incentives are actually available, how you get them, and what they are actually in the end incenting. So I wanted to just take people on a little bit of a customer journey. I don't know if you've done this yourself, but it was educational for me. So going to, for instance, the PG&E's website and trying to select a electric heat pump water heater, that the pathway, looks kind of like this. You get in, and this is a third-party website that they're using for this marketplace. Basically, you see there are heat pumps here. They are incented. For a $1,300 water heater, you get $300 off. So it's a good incentive. Is it adequate to move the market? And how come the other water heater is not incented? That's not really clear here. And then moving to Southern California Edison's website and asking the same question: if I want a heat pump water heater, what's the incentive here? And so it's not clear that there's this incentive available. There are some rebates that are available for other things, and you can see reference to South Coast Air Quality Management District incentives. If you go to an online retailer, this is a big box retailer offering in Oakland prices like this for a gas water heater. So you can see in terms of the customer experience, a much less expensive product, and also maybe one to replace the gas water heater that they already have. And then you see an electric water heater at a much lower cost. And this is, again, electric resistance water heater. And I'll just point out that on this retail website, there's no reference to any incentives that you could take advantage of. And if you are looking for especially an emergency replacement, you might just go to the store and buy this product, install it. So I know Jennifer West will be speaking later, but I did want to point out an example of a program that is trying to meet the market at the right place and actually enhance market transformation. So their program, which is providing this incentive, $1,000 to a contractor that's going to work to install these heat pump water heaters. This is a midstream incentive that goes directly to the contractor. The contractor can decide to pass it through or not, and it can also be brought together also with the Home Plus program to give a richer incentive for this. So I think Jennifer will be talking about this later. But there are examples of these programs designed to simplify the process and help to achieve this market transformation at the right place with incenting the contractor. And you can see this easy three-step process to enroll in the program. And good information on what the details of the program as well available to the contractor. I think Scott Blanc will be talking later, so I'm going to just skip over this. I know SMUD has been impacted by the COVID-19, and that has affected their program, so I'm going to move past that. This other large online retailer is another example I'd like to just share in terms of the customer experience or the customer journey. I was able to bring up on my smartphone an application, and I could have ordered a heat pump water heater in 30 seconds and had it delivered to my door in about a week. Again, this platform is great, but again, no indication of incentives, and a consumer would have to understand what was available to them and how they could take advantage of those incentives. This is a home improvement application that you can have on your smartphone. And this customer journey took nothing more than 3 minutes to select a plumbing project, a water heater replacement with a tank type water heater, and just giving some simple information, my zip code, and whether it's an emergency or not, letting them know I'm ready to hire, that I have flexible timing, and giving them my address. Within probably an hour, I could have 3 contractors call me and suggest that they would be available to do my water heater replacement. But again, no indication of incentives here, and perhaps the contractor could let me know that those were available. So it's clear that we could use incentives to help the market as it operates. That there is a functional market in California for water heater installation and replacement. But are the incentives clearly available to contractors, to the end use consumers? So let's just take a look again at this opportunity. 13.5 million units, about 1 million of them replaced each year. So if we were to look at this as an overall opportunity to get to this market transformation goal, we might say that about 15%, if we could incent the first 15% of those 13.5 million units, and give a rich incentive, say $700, we can see here that it would cost us, upwards of $1.5 billion to do that initial part of the transformation. If you understand that the opportunity is to incent the first 15%, and that should spur the market to move forward. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I think the energy equity indicator tool might have the potential for this, but when you look, there's currently no database or map to find all the incentives in the state. I'm bringing up this New Buildings Institute, this Zero Energy Buildings database, and it's using a database software and Tableau to basically provide detailed information about zero energy projects in California, actually across the US and Canada. But a tool like this can actually pinpoint by zip code what incentives are available, which ones could be added together, and what either a contractor, a program administrator, or a customer could find available in the market. So I just use this as an example to share that this could potentially be a resource for the state, maybe building upon that energy equity indicator tool or a similar tool like that. So just to close.
Oh, never mind. You're closing.
So just to close, I think it's important to make sure that we are connecting program goals with the state climate goals and policy. This is the end goal that we seek. We know that moving incentives upstream from the customer can be more effective, or giving a midstream incentive that can be passed through to the customer, and has potentially delivering cost parity or better. It is and have both statewide programs and service territory programs, but make sure that they are harmonized and to provide a dashboard for clarity about where they are and when they're available. And then streamlining and simplifying that customer journey and moving all the complexity to the back end, and of course addressing new construction now and retrofit in parallel. And as we heard earlier, really prioritizing disadvantaged communities, which we know is happening through the tech program and build program and others. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and thank you, Rory, for inviting me to the panel.
Well, thank you, Ralph. And I'm definitely noticing some themes about prioritizing disadvantaged communities, low-income customers, and also the need to make it easier on the front end and deal with all the complexity on the back end in a place where the most people can't see what's going on, and that's going to be the big challenge here. We've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. We'll be a little bit behind, but that's okay. I just want to just one more time for all the late arrivals, just to apologize for the snafu with the password this morning. It seems like everybody who has been emailing me about getting in is in, so that's good. But like I said, this is my first WebEx, so made a little bit of a mistake by not sending the password out. Whoops. All right, so let's go to questions for about 10 minutes. And
all right. Well, it looks like the first question we have here, two questions actually, both come from Michaela Topi. And the first one says, to Katie Wu, if the energy efficient participation is correlated to census tracts, how do you think we can further these programs to target these communities and also address inequities to energy access?
Thank you for that. So it's a question just to how to target those census tracts, or how to just better serves those customers who haven't participated in the past. Sorry, I'm not sure if we can unmute Michaela. Maybe she can clarify her question.
So this is Nate. Michaela, if you're on the phone, you're going to have to unmute yourself, and I believe that's *6 because I cannot unmute you. So we'll give her a second.
Sure. Well, and maybe I can talk a little bit generally as Michaela is trying to, as we wait to hear from Michaela. I think in terms of how to target census tracts that have not participated in the past, I think this is where partnerships are really key. I think that community-based organizations working in these areas, or perhaps some of the CCAs or RENs or other load-serving entities working in the areas can reach out to the customer base, depending on what their needs are. It's possible that English isn't their first language, or there may be other barriers to participation that need to be addressed. I think it's first about relationship building within those communities and identifying who may be looking for a project to implement, or where there may be opportunities and high potential for projects. But I think this is where contractor relationships with community-based organizations, and marketing, education, and outreach are really critical to targeting those underserved areas and areas that haven't participated in the past.
Great, thanks.
All right, we have a few more questions here. The next one is actually also from Michaela, and it's asked to Carmen and Ralph. Could you elaborate how we can further design programs through a market design lens, how that incorporates potential market failures, such as COVID's impact on the US's supply chains? How can incentive layering address these potential disruptions?
Carmen, you want to go first?
Boy. Well, first of all, I think there is no silver bullet, I think, for the supply chain issues that may be existing with COVID. I don't think there's any program design way out of that per se, but I think that what I was trying to emphasize is that being less prescriptive about program designs and allowing for more mechanisms by which program ideas and concepts can kind of come to the table on more of an agnostic basis based on what they can deliver, that will help spur some of the innovations that would be needed to address a wide range of problems that we can't even really, we didn't anticipate COVID per se, and there's probably 100 other things in terms of program design minutia that we can't anticipate either, from technology innovations to various other things, that I think we need to have mechanisms that are more flexible to bring those solutions forward. On another note, COVID itself presents some really interesting challenges just with how you would quantify meter-based changes in consumption and questions about attribution and shifts, et cetera. And we've been working on a project partially funded with DOE to do a collective working group on how to design comparison groups and use those standardized concepts to be able to deal with the biggest of all non-routine events, which is COVID-19, to still be able to track and understand the influence of these types of interventions and have agreements around that, so you can still be investing with them with confidence and knowing how they're affecting grid performance.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I would say, there has been no time like this in our history, right? So this is unprecedented. I think, I'm sorry, that's used a lot. So unprecedented. And therefore, it provides an opportunity for us to do unprecedented things, and really to show the leadership that it will take to overcome the crisis or the crises that we have. We have a a social equity and racial justice crisis right now. We've got a crisis of COVID-19 and unemployment, and we have, of course, over all of that, the climate crisis. And these kind of nested crises, they have similar solutions, or offer opportunities for similar solutions, and we can move forward, I think, with I think a rapid response, and I think it's what's called for. There will be funds coming into the market for economic recovery, and what we do with those funds is one of the big questions. Some jurisdictions are increasing incentives, in some cases doubling incentives or what have you. So they're trying to use the mechanisms that they currently have, but make them more robust for better financial outcomes and also to spur more efforts in the market. And I think what Katie said earlier, I think is important. The community, partnering with community-based organizations to really understand what is needed and how they can be served. Looking at opportunities for low-income, affordable housing, multifamily retrofit opportunities, multifamily new construction because there's still inadequate supply, and also schools and opportunities for school retrofits, because as Carmen said, we will be working to get back into schools, and COVID presents challenges and opportunities. So what can we do to make schools more energy efficient, but healthier and safer and perhaps decarbonized? So it seems that the opportunity that's in front of us is to act very decisively, and that the funds that are available in current programs, but also funds that can be leveraged to really spur the market for increase in construction activity, retrofit, and really moving towards these goals of achieving the goals of the state are, I think, the opportunities in front of us now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to continue going down this list of questions here. The next one is from Lisa Schmidt, if we want to unmute Lisa. She writes, Carmen/RECURVE's vision of a marketplace for energy and carbon reduction is the path to achieving these critical goals. At the crux of the marketplace is the ability to measure energy changes. The software tool Caltrack needs far more attention and thoughtful development to be up to the task. If we get the measurements wrong, we will warp the energy and carbon reduction market and come out with the wrong results. NMEC analysis needs to move from an ad hoc open source project to a more rigorous development and verification process. Carmen, do you have a response?
Nope, I'm with Lisa on that. It needs to continue to evolve and improve.
Easy peasy. In that case, we're going to go back to another question that came in from Michaela, who writes to Ralph, what incentive opportunities can we incorporate for retrofits?
Oh, that's a good question. I think what we need to do, especially now, I think we've got to understand where the opportunities for retrofits are. I think that the using that CEC energy equity indicator tool can help us to really focus these incentive programs. Right now, the opportunities for retrofit, and especially around decarbonization of buildings, there's a few technologies that we've been focused on. One is heat pump water heaters, and working to enable that market transformation. So the challenge with water heaters is that they are usually replaced on burnout, or breakdown, and so by providing more robust incentives, we could potentially get more of that retrofit activity to happen in a preemptive way. So I think that's one thought. retrofits for affordable housing can result in both decrease in energy use, carbon reductions, and also improve occupant health and well-being and indoor health outcomes. So really understanding which of the existing affordable housing projects are ready for that kind of retrofit and providing incentives. So I think, again, working with community-based organizations to really understand what their needs are and where they can support their constituents is I think, a really important opportunity. And then again, on schools, I would say, if we can understand and really target schools in disadvantaged communities, and we were a part of the zero net energy retrofit pilot program for the investor-owned utilities, and we've demonstrated that there's a model for retrofitting schools to be zero energy. Now we have this other lens, which is making those schools, safer for students and staff to return. So again, targeting affordable housing, targeting school retrofit, and also trying to make this transformation to heat pump water heaters as well.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
All right. In that case, the next question on the list is from Tristan de Frondeville, first of his name. Is there any example anywhere in the USA of a coordinated effort to change all of those front ends, retail, online, contractor, distributor, to have a common message about rebates and incentives?
I don't know if Carmen or Katie have examples that they're aware of.
I am sure. I think in California, in terms of like common messaging or the Energy Upgrade California program, I believe is intended to serve that purpose. But I'm not sure if they do like project that front end project support. I think a recommendation that I've heard several times over the years is the need for a one-stop shop to support customers and contractors in project development. I'm not sure if work is underway on that. I think what we can take away from our panel this morning is that there is a lot to consolidate in a platform like that.
I think, I know, for instance, in Oregon, the Energy Trust of Oregon, I think does a good job of being that customer interface and having a trade ally network and working with retailers. So I think that might be one good example. Efficiency Vermont, Efficiency Maine also have good and successful programs that are really targeting this decarbonization approach. So I think there are, across the country, there are several good program examples. And I think, again, market focused and trying to coordinate market activities that are already in place. And I think for California, it's a good question. How do you combine those examples into an approach that's really going to work for market transformation in the state? And I think we're on the cusp of that with the launch of the tech program. So that's exciting and something we're looking forward to seeing.
Great, thanks so much. And sorry for the questions we didn't get to, but we have a finite amount of time here and a lot to cover. But we are we are saving this that will be available as a recording. We'll put it on the PUC website, and we'll also be going through your written questions and comments on the margin here after the workshop. At least I will be doing that. So feel free to add commentary there as you go along, and even if we don't get to it in the workshop, we'll see it on our end. So the next panel is about the non-IOU program administrators, and just to sort of set it up, I'm in Oakland. I am in the territories of two out of the three of our presenters. I'm in the territory of East Bay Community Energy. I'm in Bay Ren's territory, and I'm also on PG&E territory. So me sitting where I am, I'm available. I could potentially be eligible for all kinds of incentives from the three different administrators. So that's kind of what I'm kind of getting into now. How do we operationalize this and what's already happening? So to start that off, we're going to have Becky Menton from East Bay Community Energy talk about her perspective from working with that CCA. Thank you. Take it away, Becky.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Katie said, I'm honored and humbled by the chance to speak with such great colleagues. Just to start things off, since we went ahead and did some territory analysis, I also wanted to mention that I am on land that was historically of the Ramaytush Ohlone before they were forcibly removed. I'm here in San Francisco. A lot of my presentation is around looking back before we look forward, so I just wanted to go ahead and start with a land acknowledgement. So if we can move to the next slide. So the issue that I want to get around today is really framing it. As we've discussed, we know that we need to electrify. Layering, I hope, as a takeaway, you'll understand that it is key to this. I don't remember this exact quote, but I saw this at a workshop years ago. Will we be the only society to die because it wasn't cost effective to save ourselves? I just always love to set the stage with that. Another important takeaway from this is that this effort is really a pilot. These are early steps in what we know will need to be a much longer term initiative. So it's really important that we take away learning opportunities from this experience. And then finally, there's a lot of opportunity to look at what has already been done. CCAs, publicly owned utilities, and local governments have been investing in electrification of buildings for many years. And there are some good early lessons learned there. One more click. I also need to have a disclaimer. I am one of many community choice aggregators here in California. Each are discrete jurisdictional entities led by their own board of elected officials. So that's important for me to also state. I have made an effort to coordinate with those other CCAs, but my words are mine alone. Thank you very much. Next slide. So again, I know many people have already said this, but according to the E3 high electrification scenario, electrification of buildings needs to happen yesterday. It is our most cost-effective strategy to achieving the climate goals that we have set for ourselves. The graphic on this slide shows the adoption rates that are projected in the E3 study in order to meet our climate targets. This is from the Roadmap to Decarbonize California Buildings. Currently, we're looking at heat pump water heater rates of less than 1% saturation in the market, and heat pump space conditioning is less than 3%. And this is a really dramatic initiative that we need to undertake. The existing funding that we have, even across all of the different public streams that you can cobble together, are much less than the need. I was reading an energy policy publication that looked at the capital investment necessary to achieve the targets of the high electrification scenario. And the capital investment is on the order of $29 to $43 billion in order to achieve our targets by 2050. So clearly, the funding that we have available from the state is just a drop in the bucket. And again, just to reiterate, this initiative is the first step in a much larger and longer term effort that we will need to make in order to hit those targets. So it will be crucial not only to learn as much as we can from these early implementation efforts, but also to adapt as we go, to figure out how we need to change things to make these programs work better for the market. Thank you. Next slide. So I know that the California Solar Initiative is not an exact parallel to building electrification. Building electrification is complicated, retrofits are messy, there's a lot that needs to go into that. However, there's still a lot of important things that we can learn from this very successful market transformation initiative. First off, the program acknowledged and committed to the fact that it was transforming a market. The objective was very clear. The signal was also very clear. The industry knew that there was a long-term commitment to funding. It helped resolve some of the stop-start issues that other programs have experienced. It was predictable. Incentives were tied to a volumetric step-down, and there was clear and transparent data available to help communicate to industry and homeowners alike when those steps were expected so that people could plan around it. The program was statewide. It offered a very consistent framework across the state that helped resolve some of the issues from different program design from region to region. Another thing that's important to note is that the program was administratively simple. It didn't always start out this way. As I understand, the CSI program had a lot of feedback in the very early implementation phase from industry, who had a lot to say about the application process, about what was necessary to access the funds. And in response to this early stakeholder feedback, improvements were made to simplify the program, and that really set it up to just take off. A final note that I think is also really important to acknowledge about CSI, we can't talk about the success of the California Solar Initiative without understanding the context in which that program also operated. By this, I mean the federal tax credits that were available and could be leveraged along with those solar installations, the advent of pay for performance or PPA agreements that were basically covering the upfront costs on behalf of consumers, and the importance of NEM rate design that really helped to create a financial case over the long term. Thank you. Next slide. So what we're here to think about today is whether or not these incentives can or should layer. Functionally, this comes down to the question of additionality in the CPUC regulated framework. On this point, I wanted to also clarify that many of these existing funding streams that are under question have built-in controls. Energy efficiency is currently constrained by the avoided cost metric. We saw a great presentation from Carmen earlier today talking about how projects with high upfront capital costs often don't perform very well in a TRC. I checked with the folks at Bayren, the technical consultants who support their program, around the cost effectiveness of some of the new heat pump measures that they're rolling out. At a $1,000 incentive, none of those heat pumps pass the TRC on a standalone basis. They need to be sort of coupled with other programs or acknowledge that there are other means for these measures to be installed. SCHIP is a program that focuses exclusively on the storage benefits of a program and likely won't come close to covering the full cost of all these incentives. That creates a really great opportunity for these tech and build funds to come in and capture GHG benefits. At this point, the question needs to be, is there a risk that the cost associated with these programs will outweigh the benefits to consumers and to the rest of the state at large? My takeaway is that given where we need to get, given the amount of funding that needs to go into this, and given the amount of funding that the state has on the table, I think that should be one of the furthest of our concerns right now. And next slide. You're doing a great job, by the way, Vanna. So the takeaway, incentives absolutely should be able to layer. Incentives should be designed for stacking. That stacking should be invisible to the consumer to the extent that it's possible. It should be easy for the installer. We should not be expecting plumbers to go out there and become experts in accessing 5 different funding streams through 5 different applications. Whatever can be done to layer these incentives on the back end and make it easy for the installer and easy for the consumer should be paramount. These programs should have consistent requirements. Care should be taken that eligible technologies, installer requirements, QA/QC, et cetera, play well together to facilitate to the extent possible that layering of incentives. Messaging should be coordinated. As was discussed just now, Energy Upgrade California provides a platform under which there can be consistent statewide messaging across the space. This is important. Language matters. If we're going to build groundswell in this movement, we need to work together on how we communicate the value of these appliances. Rate design is so important as well. Rate design should support not only electrification, taking away some of the barriers that exist in current rates to partial electrification of the building, but rate design should also move to supporting flexible load. We know that these new electric appliances provide greenhouse gas benefits. We know that they provide even more greenhouse gas benefits if they're operated off-peak. And we can accomplish that through pricing in the market, through rate design. A note I want to make here is that CCAs are key stakeholders in considering rate design. Currently, about 10 million of California's ratepayers are under a CCA. CCAs have had early advances towards electrification. However, they're often consulted after the fact when rates are presented to the CPUC. CCAs are ready to take advantage of electrification, but not if rates are designed in a way that undercut CCA business models. So consulting CCAs early on and making sure that rates work will help make sure that you have collaborators that are ready to take advantage of this electrification opportunity. It's also important to allow non-regulated dollars to layer. Here I'm talking not only about CCA dollars that aren't covered under the CPUC jurisdiction, but also consumer dollars, financing dollars, local government incentives that want to get on top of the stack. As it stands, we currently are not envisioning incentives that will come close to covering full measure costs. So as much money as we can get to help move this market will be valuable. And then finally, harkening back to CSI, tracking the data, making it transparent, making it publicly available, and drawing conclusions from that data as quickly as possible to adapt and change the approach and the design will be so important to making sure that we're hitting this market right. Next slide, please. A note about CCA leadership in building electrification. Not alone for CCAs, I also have to acknowledge the efforts of local governments and publicly owned utilities who have really stepped up for years to make sure that building electrification is a focus. There's been a lot of important early market development from this. When those tech and build funds come down the road, early efforts from CCAs will have offered learning opportunities in terms of the cost of measures. They'll have helped us understand how installers are familiar with them, where they need additional help to install correctly. Building officials in these areas where early CCA activities have occurred will be more familiar with the technology and will know how to install it. So they've done, all of these entities have laid a lot of really important groundwork to make sure that these programs will be able to get off running. Next slide, please. This is just way too many words, but I think it's something that can be useful for folks later. I wanted to prepare a table of the CCA electrification programs that are on my radar. Note that these are largely Northern California focused. I've likely missed some from Lancaster Clean Energy, Clean Power Alliance, some of the other CCAs that operate in the Southern California service area. But as you can see, it is a very lengthy list. There has been a lot of work that has been done from the CCAs to bolster building electrification. Next slide, please. So this is really the meat of where I wanted to spend the remainder of my time. EBCE has been working on a water heater rebate program along with Stop Waste. I won't talk too much about that program because Jennifer West, our partner in that program, who really deserves a lot of the credit for the design and implementation, is also speaking on this panel. What I can say, though, is sharing my experience as a homeowner in San Francisco whose water heater failed in the middle of quarantine. And I thought, great, what a perfect opportunity to walk the talk and to electrify my home. And I called 5 or 6 different contractors. I tried to find a single contractor who would come and install a heat pump. And the only one I found who would even consider it was offering it 2 weeks out. That's a long time to go without hot water, especially when all of your time is spent at home in your house. Why was this such a challenge? For one thing, a lot of contractors were unfamiliar with the technology and weren't willing to do it. But primarily, it was because of the fact that my house, being an 1860s San Francisco residence, was in need of electric service upgrades in order to accommodate the new water heater. And there were very few contractors who were willing to even touch that technology. I think that's important to start with because we're not just talking with this electrification initiative about the cost of the technology. We're talking about all of the other costs that are involved in a retrofit of the building. And those get really expensive really quickly, which is another reason why as much as we can do to stack incentives to help customers cover costs will help to overcome that initial shock when you're looking at a $6,000 or $7,000 project to do a heat pump water heater versus the $1,500 project to just replace the system with natural gas. There's a lot of inertia that we have to overcome with this program. So back to our EBCE example, our objective in installing our water heaters is really to focus on early market development. We know that there's a lot of funding coming down the road through tech, through build, through SCHIP, but we also know that it's not coming for another year probably. So at this point, we want to be able to take advantage of those dollars when they're available, and we can help that through helping contractors get familiar with the technology, through helping building officials get familiar with the technology, through early consumer awareness, to help consumers be interested and curious about how these technologies can help them in meeting their own climate targets or home retrofit projects. The program was informed by earlier efforts. Jennifer West and others did a really good job reaching out to different CCAs who'd been offering programs to get a sense of okay, what is your incentive level? How much are water heaters costing? Where should we set our incentive? Even with that, the program understood very quickly that the $1,000 that were being offered to the contractor were not going to be sufficient to motivate consumers to move towards the heat pump over the existing technology. And therefore, integrating with other programs became a really important next step for us as we considered the program design. Jennifer will talk more about this, but at this point, we've achieved a one application for both the midstream program and the Bay Run Home Plus program, helping to keep this as streamlined as possible for contractors and consumers in our area. And we're also working to integrate with the Water Saver program. This provides us an opportunity to have fuel substitution water heaters that are then enrolled in an existing PG&E program to understand how those water heaters can provide load and grid benefits. Where we see this going as a CCA is that once those state funds become available, and we don't need to cover such a large proportion of the cost in order to motivate consumers, that allows us the opportunity to think more closely about where the marginal value to us on our load basis is from these existing water heaters. And we can shift our incentives to be focused on that. This could be through the marginal GHG benefit. This could be through designing programs that encourage load shifting if we're seeing that just rate design isn't enough to do that on its own. And I think this is important because it really builds off of some of the comments that Carmen offered earlier today about moving to a market-based approach where a lot of these incentives can be layered on the back end based on the value to the implementer and potentially financed and built into a transactional approach moving forward. And that's a place that we see ourselves going. So that is it for me. You can go to the last slide. My contact information is there. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Go ahead and move the next to slide, Nate. Yes. No, I'm sorry. It's Scott. Sorry, I got mixed up in my brain. All right, Scott Blunk from SMUD is going to talk about their what they're doing and how they've addressed incentive interactions. Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay. Good. All right. So you can go to the next slide. All right, just a bit about SMUD. We are the utility in Sacramento. We are a community-owned nonprofit. We are also.
Hey, Scott, you are a little, you are kind of garbled, so you might want to try getting closer to your mic, possibly.
Let me see if I can switch microphone. How's that?
Give it a shot. Yeah, go ahead and proceed with the. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right, I'll try to speak up a little bit. We are electric utility provider in Sacramento. We provide the gas to our customers. We are not for profit. We've been around for quite a while at this point. And we're about 50% carbon free today. Next slide. We have a plan to get to a net zero carbon by 2040. The current plan, this was set in 2018, and I think it'll end up being much better than this. But the plan at that time anyway was we still have some emissions. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're so old. I wonder if you used your computer's mic or something, if that might help.
How's that? Well, I think it's not coming through my head. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so. We won't know till you really get going.
I think you gotta get your mic closer to your mouth.
Right, that's not working. How's that?
Sounds good now. Go ahead and try.
Sounds good now? Okay. All right, let's try again. Here, let me move this here. All right, we'll try this. Net zero carbon plan. This plan has we'll have some carbon emissions from our supply on the grid in 2040, and the plan is to zero that out or net it out through doing more vehicle and building emissions, vehicle and building electrification. We also, part of this plan is we're hoping to electrify 100% of low-income households in this plan. And we're also working on a phase program or a on-bill meter-based financing that we're hoping will be available to all of our customers, but will certainly spur or help resolve some of the split incentive issues between renters and the lessor and housing and kind of the middle income customers. So those will all kind of play into next slide. And so, yeah, these incentives that are coming out are really a wonderful thing. Great problem to have that we're even having this workshop, that we have multiple incentives and we're worried about varying. It's really great because COVID is taking quite a toll on utilities, particularly SMUD. Some of the great things about SMUD is that I always talk about SMUD as the Goldilocks utility. We're small enough that we're nimble, and we're big enough that we have a lot of in-house different features that we can do ourselves. But part of the downside of the nimbleness is we can stand up programs really quick, and we can be really innovative, and our board is leaders. But we also can retract really quickly, which is what we've done recently around COVID, kind of to head off some future financial issues. We retracted, and a lot of our programs went away. We are still offering electrification incentives and plan to for the remainder of the year. We still are on target to convert over 1,500 space and water heaters this year with our program going from gas to electric. But these other incentives that are coming on through Rec Build and SGIP are really going to help us and spur the program, and hopefully it's going to augment what we're doing and allow us to use our budgets to do more. It's not going to be, SMUD has no plan to do less because there's money coming in. So we're really hoping to do a lot more. Next slide. And I couldn't find a picture with cherries on top, but really the way SMUD would like, or these are my views, but the way I would like to see it is that the customer only sees the pay, and the customer sees an incentive coming for their new water heater, their new space heater. They don't really know what's going on, and they don't know about all these layers going on. They deal with SMUD. SMUD is well liked by the majority of our customers and very trusted. So ideally, we're going to have this customer touch point. We're going to have the trust of the customer already, and that we can kind of move these other layers that are going to be there. Are just going to be their customer sees the whole thing, not all these pieces, and hopefully there's not going to be, they have to get some money from SMUD and some money from taxes. We don't want the customer to bring that together. Better customer experience. Next slide. And it is all about market transformation, and especially in these early days, market transformation is going to be a little messy. I feel it's going to be much better to get the money out into the market and to make sure it's placed perfectly and that there's no double dipping. There's not, put all these safeguards in place. Safeguards are just going to slow the process down. It's my view, let's get them out there and adjust on the fly the best we can. Like Becky said, the solar water heating funding that originally came out, like, let's get it out there and adjust as we go. We can improve upon the program, but let's not slow anything down. Get it out there. And ideally, this money, these programs will come in to enhance existing programs, not replace them. And there's a next, or another slide's going to have a couple concepts on, how they can augment and not replace. But the other thing, really want to be clear on is the carbon is in the gas. It's there. SMUD has set a carbon goal. All of our programs have carbon as the metric. And so we are trying to arrange all of our programs around saving carbon. And it's very clear that carbon is in the gas. And while we have 50% of clean electricity now, from SB 100 and the other, it's going to get much cleaner. So every year we do more electrical efficiency, there's going to be less and less gas savings. Go to the next slide. And so this is what our plan looks like moving forward. This is SMUD's how we're getting to our net zero, at least on the building side of things. But the budget in 2040 is slightly more than the budget in 2020 for electrical efficiency, but yet there's very, very little carbon left by 2040 in doing electrical efficiency. What I want to really stress in that is the big winner in terms of carbon savings is going from a gas furnace, let's say, to an electric furnace. Code minimum electric furnace is all you need. But going from code minimum to an HSPF of like 10, there's going to be very, very little extra carbon savings there. So where we want to ensure bill savings, we may there may be another process involved to ensure bill savings, but let's not create that the ubiquitous requirement across the whole state on like an HSPF of 10, when really we want just to make it as easy as possible and let the contractors decide how to meet the goals. But for the program itself, all the carbon is locked up in the natural gas, and that needs to be focused. Energy efficiency or electrical efficiency is important in as much as it can certainly spur more electrification and cost-effective. Go ahead, next slide. And so what are these programs really? Simply, SCHIP, it looks like it's going to be, or will be focused on heat pump water heaters, possibly panels, possibly controllable. Tech is going to be both heat pump water heaters and heat pump HVAC. And then build, we're really focused on low income, 80% of the funding, I think, nearly 100% for the first few years. And if it's focusing on low income, most low income being built now, new construction is going to be multifamily. Multifamily, over 50% of all space heating is already heat pumps. So the bulk of the money in build is going to go into central heat pump water heating, or at least a very large portion. And that's okay. But it's good to call attention to it so we realize where the money's actually going. But it's okay because central heat pump water heating does need a little extra money and a little extra lighting. And I'm really calling this to the attention of just laying this out because there may be overlap in these programs, particularly like build where the bulk of space heating is already heat pumps. So if we're incentivizing on top of what they're already doing, I think that's okay. We're just bringing more money to the builders, especially because we're pushing them to go all electric. So that's okay. Can we go to the next slide? And so really, as we layer this, like ideally, and thinking, back about how do we make this invisible to the customer, ideally, it's gonna be as high upstream as possible. Give the incentive to the manufacturer or buy it down at the manufacturer level so that when it comes into the state, it's already bought down. And ideally for water heaters in particular, make them less expensive than their gas counterparts from the outset. So when they come into the state, they're just going to be incentives. You can leverage dollars much better the higher upstream they go. So I would say, look, everything as high upstream as you can. And then the next concept would be to try to augment existing program budgets. If money can go straight to the program implementers for existing programs, it can come into augment like SMUD's existing budgets, and then make it the responsibility of SMUD to verify installation, verify permits, and receipts, and all that stuff. I know that's something that SMUD would be happy to do, especially with attaching fusion into our program, because like I said, with more money, we can do so much more, and that's really what SMUD is doing. We have the goal of 80% of all of our buildings are going to be all electric by 2040, 100% of our low income. This is just going to help us get there faster. And where there isn't an existing program or existing programs aren't coming, maybe they can be statewide administration. And the next slide. And so I played around with this slide a little bit. This is what we think post-COVID electrification programs are going to look like. Our budgets, we're working through budgets for next year now. We're looking at our budgets are going to be less than what we were planning pre-COVID, but they're going to be more than they were this year, substantially more than they were this year. So this is where we're going to land when programs open back up next year. Like I said, we still have a single-family new construction and multi-family new construction program operating. The single-family existing program is kind of mixing, but we still have a heat pump space heating program going on, and then the water heating. This is where we're going to come back. And these incentive levels, I know for most people seem very high. I spoke of, they're called quote generous, but SMUD really believes that it's going to take money, and a lot of money, to start the market movement. We have seen prices come down already on product meter installation, year and a half, 2 years we've been in programs. And if we can just get the money out there and through the money to build, we can get it out there. The faster we get it out there, the faster we can see price increases. And we can see buildings converted, emissions being reduced, we can see health improvements to all the customers. Next slide. And there's my contact information. Have to answer questions. That's over to Rory.
Great, thank you, Scott. And yes, the sound was a little bit challenging. I think we mostly got the gist of what you were saying, and we saw the slides to accompany what you were saying. So thank you so much for that. And now we'll move back to the Bay Area with Jennifer and from BayREN/Stop Waste.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Just checking.
Yes, very good. Okay,
thanks. So I know we're, I think, a little bit behind schedule. I'll do my best to keep us going and keep us on track. I am Jennifer West. I work at Stop Waste. Stop Waste is a government agency in Alameda County, and we are one part of BayREN. And I have been leading on the regional heat pump water heater program, and I'm going to present a little bit of information to you today about how this is an example of layering. I want to keep the goal in mind that we really need to meet our ambitious statewide goals. We need all efforts to work together, and layering is critical. There's no one effort that's going to get us there. And if we're all coming at the effort from multiple perspectives with different benefits or different funding sources, I think we'll be better off. So the energy efficiency, the greenhouse gas emission reductions, fuel substitution, load shifting, et cetera. This is my on the ground perspective. If you can advance one slide, please. My key points, I'll come back to these at the end, but really we've heard this before, but keeping the market in mind, having consistent standards across the programs so that layering is easily done. And it's not easy to get a one application entry point basically for the market, but I think the hard work behind the scenes for us will pay off in terms of adoption. And finally, it takes a village, which I know is a cliche, but I think it makes a lot of sense here. Next slide. I hope you're all familiar with BayREN, but we are the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, and we're one of 3 RENs in California funded by the CPUC. I believe more are coming. Maybe I'm actually outdated with the 3 already. All 9 counties are in BayREN, and we do work with the local governments directly on energy efficiency. Next slide. Our program was designed to be simple, to be one program for the market. We wanted to put more heat pump water heaters in homes and catalyze this heat pump water heater market here. So we decided to go midstream for a very important reason, that the decisions made at the time of replacing a water heater, you just reach so many more if you're working with contractors, not with the homeowners and needing to educate them every 13, 15 years or so. We identified $1,000 as our incentive per installed heat pump water heater, and we required those to be not only installed with permits, but also to be grid capable. We are using incentives from our local energy providers for that $1,000. So this is not a CPUC funded incentive. The Air District generously provided the funding to set up our program. And as you see on the map on the right, it's a beautiful market for any contractor. But if you click one time, Nate, you'll see how it's really made up of all these different local energy providers, and having a patchwork of different incentive programs in each of those territories is not market friendly. Moving forward. So what we have accomplished is to reach 6 out of the 9 counties. We didn't quite reach our goal, but we launched last month with EBCE, East Bay Community Energy in Alameda County, as well as MCE in Marin, Napa, Solano, and Contra Costa counties. Clean Power SF will be joining us in August of this year, and that's more than half of the residential customers in the Bay Area. So we're proud of that, even if we didn't quite get to our 9. Next slide. We've had some challenges. As Becky mentioned, $1,000 really didn't seem to be enough to move the market. And so we were trying to figure out how to have a bigger impact than what we could afford through our one program. We wanted it to be simple enough to entice contractors, and since we've just launched, we'll kind of see if the proof is in the pudding there, but we're hopeful that we've done the work to really make it contractor friendly. We also wanted to make sure our installations were helping low-income residents, and while we couldn't build that into our single-family program, what we created through our Air District grant was installations in low-income multifamily. I'll talk a little bit more about that soon. We found that perfect isn't possible. You can't get something to be perfect before you move forward, or you won't actually have a program. And as I mentioned, we didn't get all 9 counties. There are a number of simultaneous efforts going on in other CCAs and other counties, and we're a little late to the game, I think, to be able to be in front of that. So we ended up with multiple programs happening in the Bay Area. And the no double dipping, I think others have covered that as well. Next slide. Here's our little village. Our programs in the middle here, the Air District funding was critical to set up this program. We didn't have that funding ourselves, so that grant really made it possible. Going clockwise, you'll see the CCAs that are providing the incentives. Bambi is the name of BayREN's multifamily program. That's where the low-income installations are happening, and we were lucky that BayREN's program was ready and interested in allowing our funding from the grant to help fund either the centralized heat pump water heaters, or sometimes it's heat pump technology in a laundry room or a pool heater, etc. I'm going to focus on my next slide on Home Plus and Water Saver. As Becky mentioned, we have worked hard to try and integrate our program with the BayREN single family program, Home Plus, with one application. And an interesting note is that they weren't planning to put grid capable heat pump water heaters in place, but we were able, as a requirement for our program, to make sure that those were standardized between the two programs. And then to work with PG&E. That's good, go ahead. So with Home Plus, it is a downstream program, although it can be signed over to contractors. It's focused on energy efficiency, and it was made possible after the fuel substitution test last year to get this $1,000 incentive. By layering the two, now we are looking at $2,000 per heat pump water heater installed, which we have heard should make a difference and get the attention of contractors. They were looking for layering, and they were looking for contractor training as well. So our collaboration was made a natural, made sense for them as well. And they just started a few months earlier. Water Saver is still rolling out, and we're really looking forward to that. When I mentioned perfect isn't possible, we were interested in adding thermostatic mixing valves, adding grid connectivity to our program, but the costs would have been a barrier. We would have had fewer heat pump water heaters installed as a result, and just the added complexity. So we're hoping that Water Saver, which is looking for heat pump water heaters to use their program on, will be able to layer on ours as well for that added load shifting capability. And it starts, we hope, this summer. Next slide. Now, here are the people, and I just want to pause for a minute and recognize that all these organizations are made up of people who are working hard to do the right thing. And I want to emphasize this because it's not really possible to have everyone set up their programs and have them somehow magically layer and magically work together. So Nate, I'm going to let you kind of click through in a slow way here, but our program is me and Energy Solutions, who's been key from the beginning in our design. That's Peter Florin, who I work with there. And up above from the Air District, Axum Tefera, who is our grant manager, has been a great resource and support. If you keep clicking 3 more times, we've got the folks from the CCAs. So Becky Menton, you heard from earlier from East Bay Community Energy, Lois Smith from MCE, Julia Allman from Clean Power SF. They have been very important partners as we figure out the legal agreements and make this happen. It's not an easy, simple check the box. Go ahead, 2 more clicks. My colleague at Stop Waste, Candace Mary Dauphin, is the head of Bambi, and that made it so easy for us to figure out how to layer our incentives from the grant onto her multifamily low-income program. And there's Nick Durr from AEA, who is the implementer for Bambi, and was very interested. This was, again, pre-fuel substitution test change in figuring out how to add heat pump technology in multifamily settings. Continuing, in Home Plus, Jeffrey Lang, who's the head of Home Plus at BayREN, also happened to work at Stop Waste with me before he moved to BayREN, and his partner, Mark Bigby, click again, from Clear Result, they have been so important in making sure we can get one application. And we've had numerous now online and phone call chats to make sure that can happen, data sharing, other barriers that we found along the way. And the last few, Ben Brown from PG&E, and oh, wait a second, that looks like Nick Durr from AEA. He is working on the Water Saver program as well. And one last click. There's Peter Florin from Energy Solutions and his team that's also working on the Water Saver. So what I want to highlight here is that it's not just individuals, but it's also organizations that are often involved in different parts of this system and the network, and how important it is that you are able to work in these settings to actually make the layering happen. Thanks, Nate. Next slide. Some of the other hiccups that we saw along the way, the data sharing and privacy issues are not to be minimized. They're important and need to be taken care of carefully. I mentioned earlier this kind of meta program facilitator role. You know, Becky reminded me that you can't, there was a lot of effort that went into NDAs and legal agreements and making sure that every lawyer at every organization felt comfortable with what we created. And so each program doesn't necessarily have the interests of all programs in mind. I think my role, funded by the Air District, was critical to bring together these various entities to make not only our program happen, but the layering with the others as well. So I'm not sure who can step into that role, but I think the CPUC needs to recognize how important it is to get layering right. In terms of the regulatory bodies allowing flexibility, we've heard about some of the limitations, cost effectiveness, siloed funding streams, legal requirements, data sharing, et cetera. Collaboration needs to work through and beyond those. And equity. If our public funds aren't addressing inequities, then they're furthering the status quo, which we know is not okay. It's not fair to many of our low-income residents and residents of color, disadvantaged communities. So I would like to, again, add, as Ralph did, how important that is. And nothing's perfect. So you're going to have to continue to refine things as you go. It's not going to be launched in that perfect state. Next slide. Wrapping up with the same points I had at the beginning, looking at the incentives from the user's point of view. In our situation, that was the contractor audience, but the market in general. Consistent, predictable standards. We heard that from another presenter earlier. And streamlining the applications to make it one application is not easy, but it's worth it. Finally, build your connections. You don't know who else you're going to be working with, but I think a lot of us on this webinar today will have the chance to work together as this layering moves forward. So thank you. If you want any more information, Ralph showed some of our website earlier, but bayren.org/HPWH. And that's it. Thank you.
Rory, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay, yep. Sorry. Thank you, panelists, Becky, Jennifer, Scott, for great perspectives from your PA's points of view. And I just want to say we're way behind time, I'm afraid to say. So maybe we could do like 5 minutes of questions and a 5-minute break, and then we'll still be behind time, but not as bad if we just let it go 10 and 10. So let's just do a few questions and move on to, and then take a break.
Rory, I'm not actually seeing any questions per se. A few comments here and there, a few inquiries about whether there's any legislative direction anticipated, but not really any comments. But if you want to just go straight to break, I think that should be fine.
Let's go straight to break. All right. If folks are okay with a 5-minute break, that would be great, because, and I wish I could, if we were in a room, I could take a poll or something, but let's just do a 5-minute break, come back about 11:18 or so. And then we'll start with the IOU's joint proposal. So thank you very much, everyone. Okay, I think we're ready to start up again. I see Michelle is there and ready to go. So the next presentation is or the next panel is the IOU panel. I asked the IOUs if they would just put together one joint proposal. So we don't have all four of them; we have one, and I really want to thank them, the IOU staff who worked on this, for putting the work into this. It was it was a pretty heavy lift, I'll have to say. It was 4 utilities, and each utility had different programs represented in the meetings leading up to this. And so it was a lot of work and a lot of you know, kind of a little bit of whack-a-mole. If you mess with this, then you have a problem over here. And I want a special shout out to Michelle Thomas, who's about to kick this off here, for managing the process and having numerous meetings with the IOU staff and just sort of navigating her way and everyone else's way through this. And you'll see it in the results of this presentation that she's about to give. So just take it away, Michelle.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
That's perfect.
Excellent. Okay, thanks so much, Rory, for that introduction. We really appreciate that. And in return, I just want to say that SCE, PG&E, SoCalGas, and SDG&E want to also thank Energy Division for the opportunity to participate in this huge, important discussion. Stating the obvious, achieving the immensity of the state's GHG reduction goals will require an accessible and comprehensive approach to electric heat pump deployment. I think that's been clearly stated in the previous slides. And I also want to just sort of level set and make it clear that while the IOU's layering approach in this particular presentation uses the existing paradigm for DSM program offerings, also something that's been already stated is that now may be the time to for the state to actually consider an approach that's more holistically aligned with California's building decarbonization goals in the longer term. Next slide. So I won't spend too much time. In fact, I'm hoping that we can maybe get us back on track because, again, a lot of what we're going to cover has already been stated. But these are some of the items we will touch on. And one thing I want to point out is when we get into the examples of our layering approach, the framework that we've developed, it is very illustrative. These are hypotheticals. In some cases, some of the programs that we are layering don't even have approval yet. They're still, pending authorization. So we're just basically, we found certain scenarios, one variation that we're going to share today, both for retrofit and new construction, but I just want to make it clear that they are hypotheticals. So next slide, please. This is something that has already been touched on as well. So I think both Becky and Katie showed BE adoption models for heat pumps. The only thing that's different with our slide is the fact that we overlay several electrification scenarios on top of each other. And essentially they all conclude, I think as Becky mentioned, that we should have been out of the gate yesterday. So we have a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we did was we did a little bit of research to find out, clearly this is an issue beyond California, and sure enough, the New York Public Service Commission embarked on a similar effort in 2016. They established the Clean Energy Advisory Council, which was made up of investor-owned utilities, NYSERDA, various power authorities. I think New York ISO was involved as well. And this particular advisory council was charged with undertaking a review of overlapping incentives similar to what we're doing. They were primarily focused on EE and DR, but that was primarily their goal. And I think at one point they stated that they had 13 PAs at one time that they were evaluating. And ultimately the deliverable was a multiple incentives recommendation report, which is essentially the incentive layering framework recommendation. And so we leveraged some useful definitions and recommendations from that report. So layered overlapping incentives, I think we've covered that, financial or non-financial incentives that are being offered to the same market segment, customer or technology at the same time. Duplicative incentives, essentially that's your double dipping that we want to avoid. And then complementary incentives, a layered or overlapping incentive that provides incremental value. So you'll hear incrementality discussed throughout this presentation in order to increase ratepayer value or societal value. And then some of the recommendations that came out of their report, guiding principles to align the stakeholders, developing a broad and guiding principles for the PAs to use as they collaborate and coordinate to ensure that layered incentives are complementary and not duplicative, not double dipping. Ensure coordination occurs throughout the various program and portfolio planning process. It has to be an ongoing process. It can't be intermittent. And then when it comes to an incentive inventory, it's foundational to a coordinated process. And then lastly, recognizing EM&V, continuous EM&V of programs and initiatives to assess whether a program is meeting its intended goals and objectives, and to ensure program administrators have the ability to adjust offerings over time in response to the market. Next slide, please. So some of the guiding principles that we landed on to establish our framework, the customer has to come first. Multiple programs create confusion in the market, forcing customers to shop programs to figure out how to get the best deal rather than just applying for the incentive that best suits them. A well-coordinated framework removes this hurdle, making it clear how and when customers should participate. Because of the prescriptive approach to some of our programs in the past, it's possible, it has been difficult for our customers to participate in our programs and understand really what the best fit is. So I think focusing on that is going to be important. Again, considering complementary incentives that provide incremental value to ratepayers. And I had mentioned incrementality, making sure that if we do layer incentives, that there is truly a benefit and that we're not overpaying. And then minimize market confusion in order to help our customers make the right choice. So increasing and adoption, that's ultimately the goal. So we want to make sure that we provide the right incentive at the right time. And by right time, what we mean is we don't necessarily have to continue layering the same amount of incentives at the same value. We could consider a CSI model to where we taper incentives over time as the market transforms. And then consider flexible financing approaches. I think financing options will be very important. And then, of course, being efficient, reducing admin burdens, minimizing cost shifts or cross-subsidization, sorry, and then mitigate double dipping, as I mentioned before. And then advance one slide, please. And then just how to optimize layering incentives. So these are some of the things that we tackled again as we developed our framework. So the problem statement, tech and build pilots are going to overlap with several residential DSM programs, which will cause market confusion. Potential overpaying of projects, we want to avoid that. We want to make sure we maintain and get the value for the least cost. Also focusing on underserved markets that we're unable to reach with certain programs, or if we're unable to move the market, leveraging additional programs. And then remembering that each program brings to the table its own specific rules. I think we've touched on EE rules tend to complicate the process. So just keeping in mind that, through various legislative mandates and regulatory rules, it makes it a little bit more difficult to layer those incentives. So ultimately the goal is simplifying, participation for customers, as I mentioned, and then eliminating duplicative incentives and identifying ongoing opportunities for complementary offerings. And then some of the recommendations is, so developing a framework focused on coordination, as I mentioned, that needs to be ongoing and not intermittent. Leverage and enhance the statewide programs and some of the existing inventory databases that are already in use. Leveraging a partnership agreement concept across programs. So by partnership, somebody had mentioned co-fund, which is, that has sometimes a scary connotation for the utilities, but there needs to be an ability to work across proceedings, both within the utilities and beyond the utilities. And then looking at a longer term consolidated market transformation incentive framework. So as I mentioned, something that's more holistic that really addresses the state's overarching goals. So that's sort of the background and how we started our framework approach. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Jose Buendia, who is going to take us through the rest of the slides. And one of the things I failed to mention too is that Edison and PG&E are presenting the deck. Athena Besa from SDG&E and Jason Legner from SoCalGas are also part of this panel discussion as well. So this was truly a unified IOU approach. And we had a great time, no matter what Rory says. We had a great time doing it. So I will hand it over to Jose.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Jose Buendia from SCE. Nate, if you want to advance to slide 1. Thank you. So basically, I'm going to touch on incentive layering examples and approaches that we have developed. And again, as Michelle noted earlier, is really illustrative and it's just an example of how or what potentially we could look forward to. Next slide, Nate, please. So here we have a list of existing or planned heat pump water heater related incentives. And as you can see, it's not exhaustive. Some of the panelists earlier, demonstrated much more longer list. So this is just a real small sample, but it goes to show that, there is complexity. We have, programs under the ESP and IP. Both PG&E and SCE have smart control and paper performance programs to add controls to water heaters. We have, the S-chip program with heat pump water heater incentives. We have the build and tech programs. And then we have under the EE proceeding, we have the plug load and appliance program. We also have a statewide HVAC program. But as you can see, they provide incentives for different things. Some are just equipment, such as energy efficiency. The proposed tech and build could have a lot more. The S-chip could be for equipment and labor. And as you look at the status, they're all in different stages. So we currently have energy efficiency incentives that are being offered by the utilities today. The delivery mechanisms and the incentive levels vary between the utilities. We have the tech initiative that the RFP was just released last week, expected to launch sometime in Q1 of next year. But then we all have, the S-chip heat pump water heater incentive that is pending staff proposal and then final CPUC approval. The expected implementation for those incentives would be also in Q1 of next year. And then we have PG&E's and SCE's smart control programs, the water saver and our smart heat pump water heater. PG&E is further ahead and they will likely implement, a lot sooner, hopefully before end of the year. We're still in the application testimony phase, so we probably won't see our program launch until 2022. But again, it just goes to illustrate the number of different programs touching these same technologies. Nate, next slide, please. So here's an example of what incentive layering could look like, and it's not as pretty or as illustrative as the cake that Scott showed in his example, but nonetheless, it goes to prove the same point. You have an example here where if you have a heat pump water heater that costs $6,000 to install, and again, that's equipment, panel, wiring, labor, and then adding the smart controls, how could we parse that out between the different programs? And again, utilizing some of the same programs that I touched on earlier. You have energy efficiency, and we touched on the challenges and the cost effectiveness for measures under the EE programs. But an EE program could potentially put $500 or offer a $500 incentive. The tech pilot can then come in and offer $2,500 for also equipment, labor, panel upgrade. The S-chip program can then offer $1,700 for equipment and layer, again, all stacking. And then you have the ESP and IP programs that PG&E and SCE are planning to offer that could potentially offer another $300 for a grand total of $5,000 on incentives. The customer's cost, install cost after incentives would be $1,000. So, Katie touched on this earlier. The difficult part is really valuing the cost effectiveness and the benefits from the different programs and the different value streams. But, based on the examples, the one core benefit is the GHG reduction amongst the different programs. Obviously, the E program would have energy efficiency benefits. SCHIP and ESP and IP are really peak demand reduction focused, including some load shifting resulting from load shifting capabilities. Next slide, Nate. Thank you. This is a new construction incentive example. And, similar to the previous slide, you have different layers that, contribute to the cost of decarbonizing or going all electric. In this particular case, so you have development costs, you have the cost of the appliances, you have cost for smart controls and a battery, if that's what it's entailed. And you have the different programs. You have the SE Clean Energy Homes, you have energy efficiency incentives, you have the build pilot, ESP and IP for controls, and then also a new program that we filed for battery storage called the New Homes Energy Storage Pilot under the ESP and IP proceeding. But similar to the slide previously, if you add up all the incentives, you have just under $12,000, 11.5. The cost to the customer installed for going all electric and for getting all these options is just under $3,000. And again, similar to the previous slide, you have GHG. That's pretty much the underlying theme here. You have bill savings that a customer will realize by going to this model, but you also have other factors. And again, the difficulty being with how do you parse out the benefits from the different programs and the different value streams so that each program that is contributing can get a fair or equitable return or benefit that they could claim in their program to be able to meet their individual goals. Next slide, Nate, please. So what we developed here is basically what a construct could look like for a streamlined delivery approach, right? We could have a deliberate coordinated mechanism across all the programs. And the example on the right has tech and build, SCHIP, ESP, and IP and EE. We could have a single point of contact or a single entry point for all programs, and it could be measure specific. It doesn't have to be holistic to a program. In the example that we're using with heat pump water heaters, we certainly wouldn't recommend this for the entire SCHIP program, but it could be for the heat pump water heater measure. Mechanisms would obviously have to be developed to parse out the program cost and coordinate M&V for the programs that are contributing to this effort. It would require infrastructure to facilitate the tracking and accounting. Again, as was touched on earlier, this has to happen on the back end. It can't be put on the customer to fill out multiple applications. As the utilities, as the program administrators, have to figure out how we do this on the back end so that the offer is streamlined to the customer. And again, we believe that the market transformation concept fits perfectly or nicely for this effort. And it also aligns with the improved coordination and integration of programs under the IRP and IDER proceedings. So again, once we look at on the illustration on the right, if we could figure out how we funnel all these offerings and make it one coordinated delivery so that it's one single streamlined measure incentive offering or offerings to the contractor and customer who ultimately are the decision makers in this process, the contractor making the recommendation to the customer, and then the customer obviously ultimately deciding what technology they want to have installed. If we make it streamlined and singular, then we minimize the complexity for not only the programs, but ultimately the customer who is the beneficiary. Next slide, Nate. So these are the benefits. Obviously, first and foremost, we want to improve the overall customer experience. We want it to be simple to understand and consume and help them make that decision as simplified as possible. We want to simplify the offerings for all the participants, the customers and the supply chain. Again, that includes the manufacturers, the distributors, the installation contractors, and so on. It eliminates redundancies and increases implementation cost efficiency, meaning, so if there's administrative or system costs, they could be spread out amongst the different programs. So each program is not bearing those costs. It facilitates the potential use of a single intake or application and payment for the customer. So the customer doesn't have to fill out, again, multiple applications, doesn't have to wait for a check to come down the line. However, the payment process is decided, it makes it real simple so that they get one payment, one check, or one credit, or whatever the case may be their participation in these efforts. Next slide, Nate. And so here I pass it on to Megan from PG&E to discuss the layering development phases.
Great, thanks, Jose. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Megan.
Great, okay. Next slide, please. So Michelle and Jose did an amazing job of showing the opportunity that we have in front of us, but also the complexity. And right now, we thought it was very important to identify the fact that we are really only in phase one. We've scoped the feasibility of layering incentives. We've identified the opportunities with layering incentives and the benefits for us to meet these ambitious goals. But we have a lot of work to do moving forward. I think that the key for us, and this is where we need all of these wonderful people that have presented today that are on this webinar to help us figure out the really weedy, messy complexity of how we are actually going to coordinate these programs and figure out these accounting solutions. Because in the existing paradigm, and I'm glad that Michelle led with that, this is really founded on the existing paradigm. In our existing paradigm with almost I don't know, 10, 20, however many different programs, we've got to figure out these accounting solutions. And it was very fun, also, as Michelle alluded to, as an IOU team, as we were building out this framework, we wanted to quickly try to solution for this workshop, but we recognized early on, oh gosh, we don't have all the answers yet. And so that is where we need now to take the time post-workshop and work together with you all to figure out some of these coordination and accounting solutions. I loved Jennifer's slide that showed all of the people involved in their one program. So you can imagine if we think about this and try to accomplish this statewide, how many pictures we'll have in that slide. So I'm looking forward to that. The opportunity to work with you all and see all the wonderful faces on a slide, potentially at a next workshop that Rory will host with us. Because once we do this, we can really get it right and start testing and learning through this incentive layering process. You know, the fact of the matter is we do this already today. I would argue we don't do it well. I hearken back to the Prop 39 days where, you know, we leverage the contractors and customers leverage the IOU programs and then layered on top those Prop 39 funds. But I don't know if we've gone back to the table to really understand, did we do that layering well? What are the lessons learned from that? Did we factor in, did we get incrementality right? So that's maybe something we want to do and think about as part of phase 2 and 3. And then we can really scale this to meet those long-term objectives that we've talked a lot about today. Next slide. So some of the questions that are facing us, and this, by the way, is not a full accounting of the various questions, but we need to really figure out when it's appropriate to layer our incentives. How are we going to layer? We've talked a lot about in our presentation just the IOU programs, but we know that there are our REN counterparts and our CCA partners who have all these wonderful programs. How are we going to layer and coordinate in such a way that makes sense so that we're only paying for the benefits that we really accrue? How can we make a single application actually work? I know that we have all begged for a single application for years and years and years. I've been in this space for about 10 or so years. And since the beginning of time, we've asked for a single application. I think Athena reminded me that there's been this discussion of a single application since deregulation. Why haven't we gotten there? It's because it's hard. But if we can get there, it will be so worth it. So this is my challenge and opportunity for us all. Let's make this happen, because this is really what's going to be needed to get over that hurdle and help the contractors and help those customers make really smart decisions so that we can accomplish our ambitious goals. Next slide. So in the end here, we know that layering will help support the achievement of our goals, and we've got to make this happen. We want to improve the customer experience. We've got to put the customer, and I would say contractor too, I think they're part of that customer solution. We've got to put that experience first and foremost. We've got to want to make them want to layer incentives. so that they can push this type of equipment in the marketplace. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the program coordination mechanism makes sense for all of us and makes sense for the CPUC. And we really do think this phased approach, taking it slowly and doing it right, setting it up right from the beginning, will really help us then bridge that gap and go quickly as we move forward. And again, we're in this existing paradigm, but there is this opportunity in the long term to really think about a market transformation opportunity. And this will take some programmatic and policy changes, but I encourage us to be open to thinking about how that could really work for all of us. So I think that's it. Again, thank you guys for letting us be part of this conversation and this solution. Really looking forward to further conversations and opportunities to work with you guys.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Megan and Michelle and Jose, nice job. And I just want to ask we've got till 12:30 to have a long session of questions and conversation, so that's good. I just want to start it off by, in terms of this single application notion, Megan, you said you've asked. How have you asked, and who have you asked, and who has the authority to grant such a thing?
Wait, can you repeat that question? I don't think I got the first part of it.
Oh, sure. Just you mentioned that the single application, that you've been asking for a single application for, and I was just asking, who did you ask?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I meant the collective we. Right? You see it. I mean, I remember in energy efficiency, you're seeing it a little bit in ESA right now with the existing proceeding. And so I think that there's been a call to action back since forever, maybe almost since the beginning of all of these programs, for a single application. But for whatever reason, there are these giant barriers, whether it's the legal things. I think Jennifer identified some of the barriers pretty well. It's the data sharing, it's some of the legal constraints that we have. And so that's what we need to really work on figuring out. How can we make it happen?
And the other thing I might add to that too, Megan, is Rory, when we I can't even remember, maybe it was 2010, I think, when the CPUC instituted the IDSM program, which is still in existence. And I think there was a lot of hope that that was going to be the answer to all of our, cross-proceeding issues. And so it was just, as Megan said, it's just so hard to do, to make that coordination happen when there are so many disparate rules and policy requirements. So I would say that was kind of one of those we were hoping for a springboard within IDSM, and it was tough. It was just too tough.
Yeah, Lisa Paulo just sent me something about that yesterday that I need to review to refresh my memory. Another question, just another. There are a couple of cases where I know this sort of thing is happening. I know that SoCal, I don't know if this partnership is still happening, but SoCalGas and LADWP have a single point of contact concierge program for some energy efficiency programs in their joint territories. And then I know that PG&E and Sonoma Clean Power have one application for their advanced energy rebuild programs. So are there things we can learn from those efforts?
Rory, this is Megan Dewey with PG&E. Yes, I would agree, and I think there are. I think certainly opportunities, but when you look at some of the examples, that it's a little more. Well, it's less complicated because it's usually like one or two programs. And right. So now if we go back to Jose's beautiful slide that I loved, because it was so illustrative on many different levels of showing like, wow, here's the opportunity, but oh, wow, here's the complexity. Trying to figure out an appropriate application for all of these different programs can be really challenging because, as I think Michelle said, there are all of these different program rules that they have, and legislative mandates. I mean, just in this process of putting this presentation together, I've learned so much about SCHIP that I had no idea even happened. And so I think this is some of what we're up against with the various types of programs that exist and some of the constraints. But I'm convinced we can make it happen eventually.
If there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yeah. So Rory, this is Athena, if I could add to that too. I think if you go to the streamlined delivery approach slide that we had showing, certainly there's the single point of contact, but what is behind that single point of contact? I think the non-IOU presentation talked about perhaps a singular administrator who then takes care of every person's concern, every entity's concerns, but that when it comes to the customer, they streamline it. Part of our guiding principles is to make it easy for the customer. It's about the customer. Without the customer participating, all our grand plans go to nothing. So we really need to facilitate them and the contractors. Becky was giving an example of how she made the choice to move to a heat pump application, but then it was so complicated for her and there was not a lot of contractors who were willing to do it, so that, you know, other less involved customers would have just like said, well, you know, I tried, I'm just going to go back to my gas water heater. I can get it by the end of the day. So it's when you couple that with the market transformation and in the energy efficiency space, there's a call for a market transformation administrator who will come on board to sort of coordinate a lot of these efforts. And so maybe that's an opportunity to look at how we do a singular approach to getting all of these different programs aligned. And understanding, we talked about the benefits. Each of these programs at the end of the day, when it comes to this particular perspective, is about the GHG reduction. But every other program, like the slide that we showed earlier, has also ancillary, you know, other benefits that they're looking for that in their own proceedings, it's priority. So like energy efficiency, the priority is energy savings. And in energy savings, there's a conversion factor so that you get the GHG, but we're not focused on GHG in a sense. So from that perspective, the singular point of contact takes care of making sure that the customer does get the water heater, and then each entity that's subscribing into that process takes their share of the benefits and puts it into their portfolio so they can count it. Again, another precedent for that kind of concept where we all pay into it. We're not as concerned about where it's installed and so forth, is like the statewide administration for energy efficiency programs. So there's only one lead IOU. At first we were concerned about, well, what if it's not installed? How do I make sure that I get my benefits? But at the end of the day, the commission said, you get your share of, you know, proportional allocation based on your load share and your budget that you contributed. So then it removes some of the concern about I need to make sure that SDG&E gets their piece, there's installations going on. So we kind of need to figure out if that can work in that situation too.
Great, thanks. So at this point, I think we should open it up to the chat room or the question box or whatever it is. Nick, do we have questions?
We do. Let's kick things off with a question by Shelley Leiser, if we want to unmute Shelley. Shelley writes, under this layering incentive example, how would the IOUs prevent multiple payments for the same GHG reductions? Would ratepayers be paying 4 times for the same unit of carbon reduction?
Hi, this is Jose. I can answer that. So yeah, obviously not. We don't want the ratepayers to pay, 4 times for the same unit of GHG reduction. So again, that's the tricky part of how you parse out the savings. Athena just mentioned how on the EE side how there's factors that are calculated to calculate the GHG when you get to programs like the SCHIP or ESPIP. It's really based on the GHG reduction that's resulting from load shifting activities and moving customers from peak to off peak. So that's where the hard work begins, is how do you parse it out so that we're not double counting on savings, so we're not double paying on savings, and how do you distribute based off what program or what source of funding is paying into the pot of money that goes to delivering this incentive program or what have you.
If Carmen Best is still on, I would love to hear you address that question if you're still around.
I am around.
Right.
You caught me multitasking a little bit, though.
It's okay. We all do it.
Yeah. And
did you hear the question?
I think I got the essence of it,
Okay.
in that there, we back to the theme of this panel conversation that's going on with Athena, et cetera, around the having a single application and being able to reconcile across all of the processes.
Well, this is more about how you count. Yes, this is how you count. If there's 4 incentives, how do you count the units of carbon that are being avoided?
Right. Yeah, I mean,
to avoid paying for it 4 times.
Right. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we had advocated for tracking of units, for example, in the tech program. So when at least you would know, where those units land in a utility service territory, et cetera. And for the specific customer, you could still be looking at the holistic impacts for that customer, almost irrespective of the different types of incentives that they get to those savings. I think you could have like the database that you were talking about, Rory, where you will be tracking kind of all the different interventions that could be happening. And then you couple that with a whole building or a whole customer type analysis or macro analyses that are tied to consumption metrics. I think you can get a fairly good read on, what those overall impacts are, and then taking more of the approach like Athena was saying, who put into the pot and redistributing them is more like a policy agreement to get to the broader goals rather than trying to unpack the individual attribution for each one. And I think that if you have that tracking mechanism in place, you'll be able to capture the egregious situations or have a better read on whether or not, that is a real problem versus kind of pontificating that it may be a big problem. I mean, there will probably be gaming that happens, but there's gaming already that happens in these programs. So part of the way to mitigate that is to have data infrastructure to be able to track it and monitor it.
Mm-hmm. Great.
It's not an ironclad answer, but I think it's a path forward.
Mm-hmm. So Rory, if I could add also, I think that we were talking about that perhaps SGIP's GHG reduction focus is load shifting, for example, and demand reduction. But when you look at it from an energy efficiency perspective, we're concerned about energy savings. So the GHG that we get from energy savings doesn't necessarily account for the load shift benefit in GHG. So from that perspective, there's some incrementality. And to Carmen's point, it's really important to study it. If we were studying it from an energy efficiency perspective, we have a different perspective, and we're just trying to focus on, did we get the energy savings and perhaps the load shape and the reduction based on that load shape. But we're not following the shifting necessarily and figuring out what the GHG reduction is based on that, because if they shifted and they shifted the same amount of load, there's really no energy savings from that perspective in a sense, because they just shifted the load. So it's really going to be critical to understand the objectives of each of these programs, and then to Carmen's point, measure it accordingly so that the proper attributions and benefits can be given to the right programs and there's no double counting.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And this is Katie. Sorry, if I could just also highlight what Athena and Carmen were just saying. I think this also comes back to clarifying the value streams of the programs. And to Athena's point, being clear about what the objectives are and aligning your cost effectiveness or valuation framework with those goals. And, of course, carbon is what we're after, but there are also these co-benefits associated with carbon reduction and benefits that just previously haven't been included in cost effectiveness frameworks. So I think it's also important to just think about the whole value stream and recognize that the incentive layering is achieving all of those benefits.
Right. Sorry, Rory, if I could chime in one more time too. I think that what I would caution against, which I don't want to ascribe thoughts to you, Athena, but what I heard in your answer was trying to unpack the whole. And I think that's the kind of the exact opposite of what I'm trying to assert, is that with a single application and being able to have more comprehensive consumption analytics wherein we could be capturing the shift effects, the shape effects, the reduction effects, there are ways that we could be capturing the whole impacts of these activities rather than having to try to parse out each one. And maybe we still do need to have kind of discrete impacts from each one, but I guess that's up for debate, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think we had a disagreement, Carmen. I was just saying that different programs have different focuses, and so although the methodology could account for load shifting, energy efficiency is not necessarily following the load shifts, but particularly if they just shifted the same amount of load but consumed it at a different time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go back to the questions. And Nick?
Can I respond to that?
Oh, Ralph? Okay.
Yeah, what I'm wondering about, it's interesting that Scott Blunk is on from SMUD, and SMUD was the first utility, to my knowledge, in the country to basically shift their programs from kilowatt hours and therms to carbon and thinking about greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this is a broader question about a longer term arc of policy in California. That right now we have carbon accounting and we have energy savings accounting and attribution, and so I think there's a question about a longer term vision of a transition from energy to carbon, if that is going to happen, and in what time frame. So there certainly are global agreed upon protocols for carbon accounting. And there's also methods like blockchain for making sure that there's no double dipping, right? There's attribution. So I'm just thinking that, being the 5th largest economy in the world and leading this charge, globally, there's a real opportunity for California to be thinking about that long term and putting those building blocks in place for, this transition that could be made to be thinking about, these end goals. So, and I know there's a lot of other ancillary benefits that we want to account for as well, and other concerns. So I just would kind of encourage, thinking about this longer kind of arc of transformation that it's kind of underway, and thinking about how that can help us think about programs moving forward. Because I really, the IOU presentation was really wonderful to see, and I think having that long-term view would be good.
Great, thanks. So let's go back to the questions box, Nick.
Sure. The next one is from Gray Staples. Is the issue layering incentives or coordinating incentives? At the end of the day, shouldn't the question be what is the appropriate amount of incentives customers need to implement? And how do we coordinate the sources to maximize efficiency?
I believe that was kind of addressed on one of the early slides that the IOUs showed. But I would
yeah, yeah, this is Michelle. I think that's a great point. It is we're calling it incentive layering just because there are so many different program layers to it, but ultimately we want to maximize you know we want to maximize the goal of GHG reduction. So
are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it really is making sure we're not overpaying, we're not double dipping, we're maximizing the opportunity. So coordination, I think, is one of our kind of underlying foundational issues that we are really striving to accomplish, and it is very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Nick.
All right, moving on. There was a question from Michael Colvin, and he asks, does the IOU vision include layering different delivery channels, such as an EE midstream program with a decarb downstream program?
So that's the thing, right? So like the EE for the IOU statewide program, that's out for RFP now. We don't know what it's going to look like, right? So the statewide program basically required that it be upstream or midstream. So I think they're going to be aligned a little bit better. There could be potentially a two-pronged approach where you could have upstream, midstream for the equipment itself, and then a downstream for labor and any other ancillary expenses such as panel upgrades or what have you that that a program would be covering. So yes, I mean, we're going to have to be a little bit creative, but I think from the statewide core perspective, I think we're moving most of the incentives to upstream and midstream, both space and water and heat pump equipment.
This is Megan from PG&E. I'd like to add too that I think one of the challenges that we're confounded with the existing paradigm, right? And so you do have these programs, especially in EE, that have multiple delivery channels. So I think for the time being, the short term, yeah, we want to see what makes the most sense. You know, and what is our ultimate goal? I think Ralph said it well in that we need this long-term vision. So if the long-term vision really is market transformation, then we should likely really be thinking about these types of equipment from that long-term market transformation perspective. And, you know, I think there are opportunities to focus on upstream and put a lot of effort and money towards funding towards upstream, but then couple it with some downstream, potentially targeted downstream opportunities as well. I think NIA has lots of great examples of how they do that, but I think we need to like set forth this vision first. Right now, we're just kind of cobbling it all together because we have these existing programs and we're trying to figure it all out in real time.
So this is Michael from EDF. I very much appreciate that. I think the thrust of the question I was asking, and maybe I was just reacting to Jose's illustrative slide, but I feel like there is so many different program delivery channels and so many different ways to touch the customer and the customer experience between the different programs that we have here that I just don't want us falling into the trap of, well, you'll get a $100 rebate from this program and a $200 rebate from this program, and therefore you have $300, but because we're fund stacking, you only really need $250 and you'll get the same bang for the buck. Great. You know, I think we need to think very creatively about across all these programs, what makes the most sense for our ultimate goal for each of the delivery channels, and then how do we get them to coordinate with each other?
Yeah, I like that. That's great.
Okay, next question, Nick.
All right, we have a question from Kathy Fogel that asks, is contractor training and related costs something to think about parallel to figuring out the layering? It seems like it's an important piece as the technology and related required electrical upgrades will be so new to most plumbers / heat pump water heater installers.
Yeah, I can take that. Contractor training is certainly part of the tech initiative, and I think there are other programs that have that as well, but I know it's in the tech initiative. It's not an incentive. It's kind of just a something we just know we need to do. So I don't know, does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add that, contractor training is, I don't know if anybody was able to read the contractor needs assessment that the Building Decarb Coalition put out, but it's a huge barrier. So the cost of training the contractor so that they are a primary source of influence. Somebody was saying that one of the biggest barriers to heat pump water heaters is energy costs down the road, and really it's awareness and knowledge. I mean, Becky told you her story that it was going to take 2 weeks, before she could get a heat pump water heater. I have somebody in my group that the contractor actually tried to talk her out of installing a heat pump water heater. So there is a cost associated with training that segment. And they do reach across from distributors, manufacturers, installers. It is a big issue. So I don't know how to answer that question, but it is there are cost implications, and it's a huge barrier that we need to overcome.
Rory,
yeah,
can I just
sorry,
say
go ahead.
that
Yeah.
I mean, some of the lessons out of the Advanced Water Heating Initiative from various participants. The manufacturers really rely on the distributors to do the education and training of contractors. And so there's definitely a framework that already exists for that. This is also an opportunity for a just transition where contractors who might be not getting the kind of work that they could get, or they need to transition from installing one type of product to another. This is where we can really provide that education training. And also, I would say, for instance, Jennifer's incentive directly to that contractor. So you're kind of giving them the training that they need, and also the financial incentive to make that transition and become the sales force for this effort. Without them, market transformation will not go off the way it needs to at scale.
Yeah, I can. This is Jennifer West as well. When we put our proposal together for the Air District for our grant, we put in a chunk of funds to do contractor training, and it was naive of me. I was not yet aware of the supply chain and how the market handles that in terms of manufacturer and distributor. So I don't know if that's enough. It'll remain to be seen here in the Bay Area as we do this next year of our program. But I agree with what Ralph said, that there's no need to create, it sounds like, a new structure, but really augment what's already there. With the incentives in place, the manufacturers and distributors have a clear desire to get that contractor training up and running and helping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is Katie. I believe that Silicon Valley Clean Energy has an online learning program that they have recently launched to do this sort of education. I think they do offer incentives to participating contractors. Amy Bailey shared some of this in her presentation at the CEC's AB 3232 workshop earlier this month. So they may have more information on what else could be applied in California.
Great, thanks. Nick, next question.
Looks like we have a question from Karen Christiansen. It seems like the amount needed to incentivize people to choose a technology like a heat pump water heater and the amount of incentive that can be provided given cost effectiveness requirements may not be the same. How can we address that as part of the coordination?
So the first part again was the amount of money that is needed is not.
the amount needed to incentivize people to choose a technology like a heat pump water heater, and the amount of incentive that can actually be provided given cost effectiveness requirements might not be the same.
Well, that's what we're trying to figure. What we're trying to figure out. Does anyone have any panels?
Yeah, this is Megan. I mean, I think you're right, Rory. This is exactly the issue. So when I hear that question, it leads me to believe that person is very familiar with energy efficiency, right? And so we will run up against constraints in energy efficiency, but because all programs are run a little differently, we do have this opportunity to layer those incentives to help overcome that burden and really hopefully help those customers piece together, layer those incentives together to motivate them to adopt the heat pump water technologies.
Yeah, and the EE funds are unique in that, and look, the SB 1477 funds have no cost effectiveness requirement at all. So there's more flexibility there.
I also have a request here from Nora Hawkins asking if the IOUs can explain why SGIP was not included in the all-electric, affordable, low-rise, multifamily example, and whether that was intentional or not.
Hey, this is Will from Southern California Edison. It wasn't included because SGIP incentives are typically reserved for operational incentives, not towards the developer or the builder.
Okay, moving on. There was a request by Kevin S. Sani. Can anyone please share a report that shows the success of the New York incentive layering and its structure? So maybe Michelle, if you have more information on that.
Yeah, we can definitely share that. In terms of the success, this report ended in a recommendation. So so we need to do a little bit more digging to see what their ongoing coordination looks like. But we can certainly share the guidance document from the New York Public Service Commission, as well as the final report on the framework recommendation.
Are those available online, Michelle?
They are. I believe they are.
Okay.
We can share those with you, Rory, if you want to.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm also seeing one more comment from Kathy Fogel, noting that it might be helpful to hear more from Jennifer West to hear about whether they developed a single application or coordinated in some other way. And if they did create a single application, what were the key milestones towards achieving that?
Yeah, so our single application, I guess, is really using the Home Plus platform, and that's been arranged with Clear Results through the Bay Run Single Family Program. And so the Home Plus platform, then what they're doing is actually extracting the data we need for our platform, and that is being input by Energy Solutions, our program administrator, to have the right information basically to get both of those incentives. So that's the data sharing piece that we needed to put in place between Clear Result, which is doing Home Plus, and Energy Solutions, which is doing our heat pump water heater contractor incentive. And so we ended up just using the one Home Plus platform. As I said, we're at the beginning of our process, and it really, you know, the contractor still needs to enroll in the two programs. Once they have that enrollment completed, the one application through Home Plus is supposed to work, and it hasn't truly happened yet. We're at the beginning. We have, you know, our 10 or so contractors enrolled from in our program, and others from Home Plus. Happy to report back in a couple months.
All right, and then I have one more question from the judge asking, it seems like the EE program should look at heat pump water heaters as a market transformation initiative. Is it appropriate to consider for the new market transformation pilot EE program adopted? Is that being considered?
Nick, can you just clarify which judge?
Kathy Fogel.
Sorry, this is still Kathy.
Okay, thanks.
Nate, I'm not clear on the question. Are heat pump water heaters being considered for the program? I'm not sure.
So I've unmuted Judge Fogel. So Judge, if you want to clarify or follow up on that.
Sure. I'm not tracking the energy efficiency proceeding and what's going on very carefully, but I was aware that there was a market transformation, I think, pilot program adopted in the last couple of years. And at least when I was working on this, the thought was that, at least, or it seemed as, well, my personal thinking was that market transformation initiatives might have different cost effectiveness requirements, that the cost effectiveness assessment for energy efficiency would be assessed over a much longer time period. And so I was just curious if that, the heat pump water heater, I would agree with the many commenters who were emphasizing that this seems as though this should be considered a longer term market transformation initiative, and it's just getting started and focusing on the incentive coordination. But perhaps if it is truly a longer market transformation initiative, it would be appropriate to consider out of that energy efficiency bucket in terms of some of the funding and addressing and maybe cost effectiveness requirements that were at the least considered over a much longer time period.
So this is Athena with SDG&E, and the Commission just approved the market transformation framework late last year. So we're supposed to be in the process of acquiring an administrator. Edison's Edison or PG&E is the designated utility, and then there's a structure that's being looked into so that people could make proposals as to what market transformation programs they would offer. And then alongside with that, I think in energy efficiency, the Commission is also looking at re-examining the cost effectiveness criteria for different initiatives that are going on so that it's not subject to the fundamental TRC or PAC test, which is not necessarily, as everybody has said, amenable for other types of activities. So hopefully with that structure and a lot of focus on this effort as a good market transformation effort, that it could go under that, since fuel substitution is actually the mechanism by which energy efficiency is promoting these different types of technologies.
This is Becky, if I could also chime in on that. I think, Kathy, your point is very well taken, that this really is a market transformation program that we're undertaking. As I understand, the market transformation funding under the EE umbrella is pretty limited. It's around 12 to 16 million, the last I had followed it. So I think although I'm seeing Rory's raised eyebrows, so I'm wondering if I got the number wrong. In any case, I think what would be really valuable is if the significant groundwork that was laid to provide input to the Commission on what the foundation of a market transformation looks like, how those incentives should be developed, how that program should be administered, the stage gate concept. If some of that procedural activity could make its way into recommendations for how the Commission should treat the overall incentive framework for this program moving forward, I think that would be a good lesson learned.
I don't remember the budget. I thought it was more, but I could be mistaken. I shouldn't raise my eyebrows. Any other questions?
I am not seeing any at this time.
And Rory, I guess one thing I just want to try and pull a couple of threads together, because I think we all saw those market transformation curves that were presented, that E3 put together, basically showing what it looks like for space heating, for water heating. We do have a market transformation program about to be launched, and that notion of the fact that there, for instance, with water heating, there are 13.5 million units, and that number is growing, and 95% gas. And if we're replacing those units to the tune of about 1 million units a year, I think we really have to seriously ask ourselves what program activities are going to deliver a transformation of up to 1 million units a year, recognizing that it needs to ramp up. But we're seeing again 1 to 2% market penetration. What we've done in the past has not yet delivered the kind of scale and volume and market transformation. So I think that the challenge is in front of us. It's a tremendous opportunity, and clearly this idea of a market transformation administrator orchestrating the programs that are happening, but again bringing alignment and really questioning, as one of the earlier speakers said, like cost effectiveness could be the thing that keeps us our hands tied. And so anyway, I think there's this tremendous opportunity with this ongoing replacement of units and of course all new construction to really make the transformation happen soon. I think what we're faced with is this question of, is it the right combination of programs and incentives that are going to bring about, as Peter Turnbull has said, not 1,000 units a year, but 1,000 units a day.
And I should add that we did add into the tech RFP a requirement that they address this the issue of incentive layering, and that the implementer address that in their bids that they send to us. So, well, if that's it for the question, yes.
Can I add one thing? This is Jennifer West again from Stop Waste. I don't think I did it properly in the Q&A section, but I'm just concerned that the contractors, the market actors, the users of these anticipated layered incentives voices aren't here today. And I'm curious how the CPUC plans to engage with that portion. I did see Kevin Clark from REAM responding about training, which was really helpful, I thought, and could amplify what he said there, that if there's a reason to do it, it will happen. But I'm concerned because the CPUC processes are hard for market actors to engage with. And so the folks you see here today are those of us who spend our time tracking what's going on. And I want to press you to find a way to make sure that the folks who will be using the incentives are heard and participating.
Sure. And I would say that, I think that might be helpful to find out exactly, we do this through our service lists, which people sign up for, but yeah, you're right. We're not always proactive about finding parties that to talk to. I would suggest that if in particular associations or industry folks that we should be engaging with on this, that you send those contacts my way, and I'd be happy to talk to them.
Great, thank you. And not just me, I think there's others on this
I meant
listener who might know too. Thank you.
I meant the royal you.
Perfect.
So yeah. All right, I think we're trying to wrap up. We have one more final slide. So we released the tech RFP on June 23rd. As I mentioned, we hope to get a contractor on board for tech in the first quarter of 2021, and we would want this to be framework to be finished by then. But we should have a draft proposal to you much sooner than that. It'll be noticed in some form on the 1901-011 proceeding listserv. And my final note is just, if you have any questions or ideas as I'm putting my pen to paper on this, my contact information is right there at the bottom of the slide, and you should feel welcome to contact me. And then, as usual, when the staff proposal comes out, there will be a chance for a round of written comments at that point. So at that, I want to thank all of you for bearing with us on the kind of rough start that we had, but for being here and participating. And thanks to the panelists who did a great job of preparing and presenting today. And then thanks to my colleagues once again, Nick and Nate, for sort of running the slides and facilitating the questions, and Abi, who's been doing some note taking. And that's it. I think we are adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your day and your lunch. And maybe we can all have layer cake for dessert.
Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thanks.